I don't even have to bang the gavel. Thank you, everybody, for being so quiet. I think we're all here, more or less on time. Welcome to our third work session on the FY 2025 to 2034 Capital Improvement Program. My notes say we're going to begin with some highlights of the Capital Improvement Program. I'm not sure if we're doing that or not, but I know we are going to get into a discussion on Parks and Rec, Arlington Neighborhoods Program, Facilities Energy Resilience, and we also have Stacy Snyder from JFAC here with us, the Joint Facilities Advisory Committee, and we will talk with her towards the end of the meeting. And I think I'd like to remind everybody that presentations are available on the county website, arlingtonva.us, and I'll turn it over to you to Mark to get us on. You're on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we start, I wanted to just mention a few numbers when it comes to the Department of Parks and Recreation. We all know we have about 240,000 residents, and we have about 64,000 people who come in and commute every day. So we have 148 parks that cover 950 acres. We have 19 indoor facilities. We have 70% fitness facility discounts for residents age 55 plus, and we have a park within 10-minute walk of 99% of our resident homes. So throwing out a lot of numbers there. I'm always thrilled with the level of work and the way which our Department of Parks and Recreation excels and the way our community is able to use those resources. You're going to hear a presentation from Eric Beach. He's going to walk you through a lot of details about what we've done and what we plan to do. We always wish we could do more, but I will let him explain why what we've proposed for the next 10 years is a perfect blend of everything. So over to you, Eric.
Yes, the only thing you forgot to mention was all the awards we win, because our parks
Yes.
do win a lot of awards. We just won one this year, and you're going to look it up? I can't remember.
For the last 8 years, we've been among the top 5.
In the country.
By the Trust for Public Lands, we've received that ranking, and I think we're the fittest jurisdiction in the world, something like that. I'll let you explain.
Large city in the country.
I think some of those people who live in Switzerland and Nepal might be a little fitter, but that's okay. Take it away, Mr. Beach. Thank you.
Thank you. As you know, I'm Eric Beach, the Park Development Division Chief for the Department of Recreation. I'd like to just note real quick that our director, Jane Rudolph, is not here today. She's on a long scheduled vacation out of the country, sending me pictures of a beach somewhere. So it's just me, but not just me. I know. Tim McIntosh, our Park Development Studio Manager, is here, as well as Brittany Canny, our Budget and Management Specialist, and Bob Capper, our Asset Manager, are all here with me today in case we have any questions that I might not be able to address. I'd like to start. Next slide, Karen, please. I'd like to start with our basic framework as how do we approach putting our CIP requests together. We look to continue existing projects that have been identified previously and to meet our commitments to our partners like APS and the development community. We want to keep up with our replacement schedules and adhere to the overall direction of the Public Spaces Master Plan. And additionally, DPR wants to ensure that we are investing equitably in Arlington.
Now, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second. I think it worked really well last time to the extent that you have questions along the way, because the presentation is not enormously long, but there'll be some logical breaking points if you want to stop and ask questions.
Thank you. Thank you for encouraging this very shy group. Well, that'll help us. Don't overdo it, colleagues. All right.
All right. Let's see. Where was I here? So I think I talked about our basic frameworks as how we'd like to put our CIP requests together. We'd like to continue our existing projects that have been identified and meet our commitments to our partners. We want to keep our replacement schedules together, and we want to make sure we're investing equitably. So I think I covered that, but I just figured I would double do that in case I didn't. As you've seen, next slide, please. As you've seen in previous presentations, DPR manages a multitude of assets throughout our 147 parks and almost 1,000 acres of public space. And some of those manager had mentioned, but these range from 82 playgrounds, 54 athletic fields, 250,000 trees, and thousands of tables, grills, recycling cans, and such. To maintain those assets, DPR uses several tools. Next slide, please. In 2023, we completed an asset study that looked at the physical condition of every item in our park system. DPR uses a test for the maximum negative acceleration on impact of GMAX, and I promised last time I would be able to say what that was. So that is the GMAX is maximum negative acceleration, which is a test that measures impact on attenuation of a child or adult's body hitting the turf. In 2022, DPR completed a pavement condition index, or PCI, to assess the condition of our trails. And lastly, we had a third-party engineer survey all of our bridges and fords and reviewed their condition. Next slide. This slide highlights what we have accomplished over the last 4 years time period. The county has invested over $39 million into the maintenance capital and parks master plan programs by fully renovating or building 30 new parks. Almost $9 million have been invested in replacing our synthetic turf fields, and additionally over $6 million have invested in our trail and bridge program, with 4.5 miles of trails repaved and multiple bridges being replaced. Next slide. In the CIP, DPR has 5 main programs it uses to manage our portfolio. These are parks maintenance capital, park master plans, the synthetic field program, the trail and bridge program, and land acquisition. I highlight these here because we have sub-programs and the terminology gets a little confusing, but just to kind of highlight that the program is managed by within those 5 major programs. These programs are funded by a combination of bonds, developer contributions, PAYGO, TIF, and other funding. Bond category is by far the largest at 64% of our CIP funding, and developer contributions next at 11%. Next slide. Before we get into the specifics of the CIP.
Can I ask
Yep.
just one?
Turn on your mic.
Oh, sorry. Can I ask you something? The developer contributions, 11%, is that consistent with past updates? Is that, the piece of the cake? I know that the cake is, it is not a defined one.
So it varies depending on what's happening. I believe this is probably a little higher this year because this includes the CoStar partnership that we had. And so there's the 14 million worth of developer funding in this cycle that's being planned for.
So that's a good year for, it's a good update.
It's a good year. I think we've been trending upwards a little bit in the CIP, in the developer funding category because we've been able to have some success there, but this is a bit of an up year too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Before we get into the specifics of the CIP, it's good to reflect on what we've done over the last year. DPR has renovated Towers, Alcova Heights, and Marcy Road parks, renovated bathrooms at Fort Scott and Madison Manor, and replaced safety surfacing at the Tuckahoe Playground. Next slide. Through our synthetic turf program, we've replaced the fields at Washington Liberty and Wakefield High Schools, Barcroft and Rocky Run Parks, and inside the Gunston Bubble. Next slide. On this slide, you can see the distribution of DPR projects. We have previously striven to achieve a wide geographic distribution of our projects. If you recall from my PAYGO presentation, DPR has now expanded its asset condition study to become a park condition and equity assessment. The use of this new assessment will have an impact on our geographic distribution on an annual basis. As DPR investment will be moving towards a more equitable investment of resources across neighborhoods rather than solely looking at a geographic equity. I think at this moment we're going to pause quickly. We're going to show you how the interactive map works. If you were to go to the county's website and to the link, you'll see here this is all the projects I believe contain the CIP, and you can filter for parks. And then you could filter for a specific program. So for example, we'll use Gateway Park as an example. And use the search bar to type it in.
Yeah.
And when you do that, there'll be an indicator on the map itself. And then you can click on it, get a little high-level information. And then at the bottom will be more info on the actual project and the project page for that
Cool.
CIP project.
Cool. Thank you for that little test drive.
Ah,
Appreciate it.
thank you. I think we're going to go back to a presentation now.
When I retire, one of the things I've said is I'm going to just play with our website.
There's a lot to do
There are so
there.
many cool tools in there. You get lost. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to go now through projects included in the early years of the CIP for FY25. So the CIP includes $2 million for the renovation of Doctors Run Park. This will update the playground, volleyball courts, circulation, and bring things in ADA compliance and provide stormwater improvements. There's almost $2.5 million for the replacement of the playground, circulation landscaping, and more at Arlington Hall West. This playground is an older design, and parts can no longer be obtained for it. The CIP includes a line for what we are terming pooled projects. This is a group of projects generally too small for an individual CIP or PAYGO project, but too costly for regular ongoing maintenance. These are anticipated to bring much-needed improvements to Dark Star Park, Kirkwood Road and Kirk Road Neighborhood Park, 18th Street North and North Lincoln Street Park, James Haley Park, and possibly Lang Street Community Gardens. Next up, our projects expected in FY26 and 27, with approximately $2 million in funding to replace the shelter and playground at Bon Air Park. These well-used facilities are nearing the end of their life cycle. The CIP includes about $4 million to replace a playground at Cherrydale Park. This park suffers from extreme elevation issues, and we believe we have found a way to renovate the playground and bring it into ADA compliance. Douglas Park Phase 2 is a continuation of the work we are beginning with Douglas Park Phase 1. Douglas Park Phase 1 focuses on the more natural side of the park to the west, and Phase 2 will be focused on the more active side to the east. This project will replace a playground, address circulation and ADA, and add site furnishings such as benches to the park. Spanning from the FY25 to FY27 are 3 projects in Crystal City. The first, which will begin public engagement shortly, is Metro Market Square. This is a parcel located at the corner of 18th Street South and Crystal Drive. The future Retro Station East entrance is located on the same site, and the project calls for just over $9 million to develop the urban public space called for in the Crystal City sector plan. The second project is $8 million for Center Park. This 2-acre site has just been secured for public access easement and will contain a mix of social spaces and other activities to create a central gathering area. The third project is 15th Street Park at $6 million to provide more of a quiet place of respite for the Crystal City, and the park will be developed after road work is completed on 15th Street in conjunction with adjacent development, which will provide the location for the future park.
Can I add one question there on page, whatever that was, that we're talking Crystal City? So all of these have some TIF funding in them, and can you kind of articulate why we use TIF sometimes and we don't use it other times, so versus Gateway, for instance?
Good question.
So TIF is used primarily in the Crystal City parks, almost completely fund Crystal City because the TIF, I would need to make sure I'm certain of this, can only be used within the national landing boundary that defines the TIF. So something like Gateway Park is in Roslyn, and the TIF funds don't apply because their taxes are coming from the businesses in the Crystal City, Pentagon City area.
Should we explain a little bit what a TIF is? Do you want to just go a little bit,
So
transportation?
I'm actually going to maybe.
Tax increment funding.
Financing. I knew I would kind of get that the crosswise. And that is part of a tax that's assessed to the businesses that they've agreed to participate in that's defined by the boundary of those 2 areas in Crystal City.
And it's just on the incremental.
And maybe part of the question, I think, is people sometimes confuse bids and TIFs, so maybe a little sorting out of that by someone other than me.
Yeah, and I actually don't have the maps handy with me. I think that the tax increment financing district has been in place, I'm going to get the years wrong, but it's been probably 15 years. And the increment was baselined, and then we set up a new baseline related to Amazon, but I'm not going to get into that right now. It's a different issue. But we have conversations, we're required in our agreement with Amazon, we sit down and talk to them once a year about what kind of investments there'll be in the area. And the business improvement district, that is something where the businesses in the district pay an additional tax for things that are definitely more operating in nature and enhancements in services as opposed to capital investments.
And we have a TIF for Columbia Pike. Is that
We
the
have a
only?
TIF for, yes, we do. We do have a TIF for Columbia Pike.
I think those are the only 2 we have, yeah. Okay, thank you.
And
Yeah.
to make sure, this is not an additional taxation, it's sequestering a part of the value added or the
increase.
The increase in value.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's local.
right. What we do is we assess the value and then we take 25% of that total against a certain baseline, and then we sequester it, as you said, and use that for investments going forward.
No, thank you. That answers your question, probably more than you wanted. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Eric.
All right. Gateway Park, which is moving quickly through our master planning process, is a $31 million project that will renovate the major public space in Roslyn. The last CIP only called for the design and construction of the east side of the park, the construction of the west side outside the 10-year CIP. With the agreement with CoStar, which provided almost $14 million in funds for the project, out of the $31 million total, both the east and west side are now able to be constructed in FY27.
Can I ask, as part of the design for that park, I know one of the concerns I hear a lot is no matter how good the park is itself, the roads and the transportation around it make it very much a challenging environment. To what extent are we planning to or able to address those contextual concerns in terms of designing the park itself?
So we've had, about a month ago, we had our first engagement around Gateway Park, and that was basically to collect information on the park, how people are using it, how they're accessing it was a very big part of it, and to see if there was any, for example, I think stood out about how people are entering the park, particular corners, particular roads, particular intersections, ask some questions around the bridges. We have not begun the design yet. That will be part of our next engagement in, I believe, a couple of weeks. We'll be coming out with some initial concepts. But as part of the planning, we do have a core team that we work with, the Department of Environmental Services, the transportation folks. And so what we will look to do is to match some of the information we're getting from the planning process with some of the improvements that are planned by DES already in the work, may already be in the works, or may kind of find some new creative things that we may want to take a look at. And so we will continue to evolve that as it goes forward, because getting to Gateway Park is a very critical part of it, particularly not just for the event use, but more so to make it an active place at all times. Yep.
Excellent question. I think the people who are designing it designed the High Line in New York, is that correct? So they've got to be very familiar
Yep.
with problematic transportation, so that's great. Thank you.
Yep.
Takis?
I have a procedural or, a kind of a methodological question here, especially on Gateway. So is this the number that we put in the CIP is a number of funds that are available for that somehow, and then we asked the designing team to to create a project that fits that frame? Or do we have an approach for where we more or less have an order of magnitude understanding of what we have to invest, and this is the appropriate order of magnitude?
So it's the latter. It's very similar to most of the projects that have been in out years of the CIP or just beyond any design work having already happened. We use a per square foot cost for what typical park development is, and that ranges from one end usually of like maybe $125 for a less developed park to all the way up to $225, for example. And so I don't know what the exact number we use for Gateway, but we use a commensurate number for urban developed parks, and then we create a estimate for that. And then that allows us to do our CIP planning for the numbers that we're requesting for it. When projects are in the out years, it gives us generally a good estimate that we want to give parameters to our design firm, because we want to make sure we're not overspending and we're being on budget. When projects are a little bit, have another CIP, that could be iterated a little bit between CIPs. If something were to come out through the community that wanted a different change or didn't need as much money, the price could be altered in an upcoming CIP to adjust the right number. But it's basically a target based on our experience.
Yeah, thank you. The reason why I'm asking is because this is a particularly challenging park to design. Yeah. It's over a highway. It has the issues that Ms. Coffey just mentioned, et cetera, et cetera. So $30 million is a very respectable amount of money, but this is also very respectable, size and challenge of a project. So that's why I'm asking.
We did, I can say we certainly used the higher end of our estimate spectrum, because we do know that Gateway has, for example, a lot of, not just some of the transportation issues, but we have structural issues with the bridge, and we have pedestrian bridges that may have to be addressed, either remaining or improved or things like that. So we feel pretty confident with the numbers. You can always dream bigger, but there's also balancing the funds across lots of projects too. So we want to make sure we're setting good targets.
Great. A little constraint is good. Maureen?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the 1 million in other funding, because I know I had heard from the Roslyn bid a little bit of anxiety that 4 years ago, having them contribute potentially into this would have been a lot easier than in the current, market realities, and the amount that they're trying to do with, security and on the ground and really helping to make it a livable space. And so I read the funding note, but I just want to make sure that we're actively talking with them about what's going to be expected, because I think they kind of felt like they weren't really sure what that bucket of money was, or kind of what the expectation on them was.
So we have, I believe from the last CIP, we've reduced that from 2 million to 1 million. So we have made some adjustments based on our conversations with them. We do meet regularly with the bid, the director and I, once a month, just to stay in touch to make sure they are getting a sense of where they're coming from. I don't believe it's defined yet, but we are in pretty good communications with them.
Yeah, I've had several doses of anxiety injected into me by Mary Claire about that. And I think that, one of the things we've looked at, and you're absolutely right, it's not going to be as easy, asking the bid to perhaps be cheerleaders for a fundraising effort too. They have a 501c3 set up, a fund for arts and innovation, as a way to go out there and get that. But I think that they're committed to, I'll use maybe an analogy, we have a relationship with Arlington Soccer Association down at Kenmore in the fields there, where they're going to be raising
$2 million.
$2 million. So we thought in this case, it was appropriate to put a mark in the budget. And if I know Mary Claire, I'm sure she'll overachieve. She's going to kill me for
I
saying
have
that.
no doubt.
You're good? All right, thank you. Let's move on. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we were up to the 3 urban parks, and those parks are Maury, Hearthstone, Milliken, and Gumball Parks, and they are set for $8 million in FY26. The master planning work is expected to start soon, and we'll look at these 3 parks comprehensively to ensure thoughtful use of each and coordinated redevelopment of those 3 parks. Drew Park is new to the CIP and calls for $350,000 FY26 for public engagement and master plan, followed by $115,000 for design in FY27 and $1,820,000 in construction in FY28. This total project of $2,240,000 is enabled by the county's recent acquisition of the second half of the duplex located in the park and in this picture. And the master plan will incorporate that parcel and land previously swapped with APS into a renovation.
Can they have a bathroom? Talk about that.
I've been requested to talk about the bathroom, a potential restroom for Drew Park. And so we plan that it will be part of the community process that when we engage during the master plan process. So we will see how those parcels are incorporated into the park and to see the community's temperature for having a restroom and where it might be located and what that may entail.
Thank you.
On Drew, can you also say how that's adjacent to an APS site and also adjacent to some economic development sites that are of interest? Can you share a little bit about how all that fits together? And I guess also affordable housing, 2 affordable housing, 3 affordable housing sites.
So when we get into the master planning work, we will obviously reach out to our colleagues in either AED or CPHD as well as APS. That is pretty typical thing. For example, with APS, a lot of our parks are adjacent, Stratford and HB Woodlawn and those. And so we will coordinate with the different entities to see. There may be some of the economic development aspects. I know there's been some different thoughts how some of the parcels or adjacent areas could be used. And so we have had some conversation in the past and we will have to advance that. This funding, I will note, is just an estimate for the park development work. So there's not, in this particular budget, not for physical construction, but during a master planning, we could certainly work through that.
And so during master plan, we'd be coordinating with APS. I guess even like Stratford Park, for instance, which was next to the then HB, they were slotted near each other, but it took a while to get them coordinated. Have we gotten better at that?
Yes, I think we actually have, there are some new staff that we've built really good relationships with APS, at least from our sort of team-to-team conversations, and we have a pretty good relationship. For example, I communicate regularly with APS around the synthetic field, and so a lot of the real estate land use issues, so with synthetic fields, with Kenmore, so they're a regular phone number on my dial list, if you will.
Great. And I think we'll hear more from JFAC later, but my memory is Drew shows up in sort of the top 10 at least, or maybe top 5 of possible maintenance projects. So making sure that we're in lockstep as those details get worked out would be great.
We can certainly do that.
Matt?
Thank you. This is probably my one area of questions on this whole slide deck. Just give me one of those
Oh, sure.
files. I mean,
Happy to do that.
so
Thank you for asking.
you mentioned 3 buckets. I get it takes time to plan a park. 115, 300, and then the construction. I guess I'm just wondering about 28. Is this we don't have space to bond in our CIP, or it takes sufficient time to do construction? It's a year more than I might ideally wish, and I want to understand whether that's a staff capacity, which is reasonable, or a funding bond room under the 10% or under the various tests.
So I think the way we look at it is probably the realities of going through all the steps of a process. Master planning, which is per the PSMP, we now take for adoption to the county board. So we're looking at 8 to 12 months, depending on the robustness of the conversation, to do master planning work. Design usually can take place in about 8 months worth of time, but we also have 2 to 4 months of permitting. And so what that really means there's 2 years before you're ready to go to construction, because you would then have to have a board action for construction permit. One of the things I think the community, and please take this for what it is, the being FY28 really means money's available in the first half of FY27. Calendar year 27. So FY28, when we use the CIP, it gives us time if we need to be longer, but it generally probably means calendar year 27 for construction start.
Great. I might just follow up offline with a little questions to understand this, given the desire to move quickly, but the desire not to overpromise. But thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. Under time.
I have the tiniest question, but the Ballston Virginia Square, our Civic Association had raised this. I think in our CIP detail, it calls these three projects Ballston projects, and there was a bit of kerfuffle about that. So just noting it in case we can clean it up.
Yeah, if it was, that would be an error. Should be the Virginia Square area.
Gary?
All right, noted. Takas? Takas, you're covered, okay.
I was asking about the funding sequence
Okay,
for
onward.
Drew.
Onward. Okay, let's see. Next slide, please. Also included in the CIP is a new project for this CIP, and it is anticipated to be a 1-acre park at 26 and Old Dominion that is an outgrowth of the community planning work done associated with the location previously. The exact location uses of the site are not known at this point in time, but a planning process to work through those details with the community is anticipated for FY28 with the CIP. The CIP also continues its commitment to the Arlington Boathouse project and provides for almost $16 million in construction funding in FY28 for the lower site near the river. This is critical in meeting commitments to the National Park Service to be under construction by 2029. Should be noted that of the $16 million, the CIP calls for $6 million in outside funding sources, and the balance of the $28 million project is made up of a little over $12 million in FY34 for the upper side of the boathouse. The proposed CIP also looks to continue previous commitments to convert the Kenmore Middle School natural grass field to a large synthetic turf field. It is expected that outside fundraising will provide $2 million of the $9.8 million project, and the balance of that will be shared between the county at 70% and APS at 30%.
Thank you. I'm just going to verify. I think you said on the boathouse, I have this vague memory that it has to be completed by 2029? What it has to be done by 2029?
Construction has to start
Has to
by
start.
2029.
Okay, and the only thing that's been around longer than longer than 26 and Old Dominion, which we've talked about forever, I'm glad to see that here, is the boathouse. So I hope we can, I'm not going to be here, guys, but you got to make sure that gets done. All right, Maureen?
Question on 26th and Old Dominion. I know that it currently houses the salt dome for our snow, et cetera. Is that being relocated? Have we just found we don't have the same need for it given our climate reality? Like, what's happening with the current use?
I don't want to necessarily speak to specific details. I think there's lots of call-outs from DES here, but I don't believe there's been any changes in the need or the use for the site. And so it will be, obviously any work with this would be driven by the demands of those facilities at the site.
Okay, so those demands will remain on site and the park will be in addition, not
It'll
instead of.
That is
co-locate,
correct.
in other words.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you for clarifying that.
But it's not part of the I mean, this is a completely different project, how exactly these facilities will be configured, because the current configuration is kind of a temporary, sturdy but temporary one, right?
Well, yeah, let me at least offer, the salt dome up there was, when it was built, we spoke to at some point in the future coming up with a permanent one. The structure itself is quite hardy and doing really well. We might have to replace the canvas,
Yeah.
but I think it's, right now, we had no intent of doing anything more on this site other than trying to locate a park somewhere in the rest of the property that, different from where we have some brining machines and sort of the salt facility, not expanding that. We also have the mulch area.
Yes.
And there's another area there. Somewhere in that area, we would be planning, when I say a park, that remains to be determined what it actually would include.
So the mulch area is kind of the movable part of the current facility.
I don't know if it's movable, but I mean, that would be something that we're intending to keep there, but we would figure out what to do with that. And then there's enough space there to create an additional park.
Okay.
And I would just add, as I was on the beautiful working group for this one, the working group did say that they would recommend doing a full master plan of the whole site before doing too much work. So I'll just bring that back.
Absolutely. And I would like to say that I'm intentionally not recommending any master planning, but if the board wants to do a master plan, that would, we follow direction on that.
Right, right. And then the other question I had is just, can you share how we think about when we're adding a new park? We've got a lot of parks to maintain, and we sometimes add them with new development. But what's our decision process about where to add a new park and when it's time?
So we would be very lucky if we could sort of work through very early on and say this is a target area for a park. We do know that through the public spaces master plan, we have a level of service in there that does have some geographic recommendations for where things may be lacking, but they're individual uses. A lot of our driving decision-making in when we add new parks is based on existing long-term planning documents. So for example, the 2019 PSMP was based on 2019 was based on 2004 and the one before that. Or for example, in the case of 26 Old Dominion, there was a robust community process to talk through, and there was some calls and recommendations for space there. So when in lack of being able to necessarily pick where we want to put our parks, we're using other sort of larger comprehensive planning. Sector plans is another example, like for example, the Clarendon sector plan update, Crystal City sector plan. It has a more fuller conversation on development, transportation infrastructure, and how public space fits into that. And so then we kind of then are moving from the next step down. Okay, now we're picking up the sort of rolling up our sleeves and getting those implemented. And so we really look to that high level planning to kind of drive where we go with new parks.
Okay, Matt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just for context, I'm happy to have conversations with all colleagues about 26 and Old Dominion. I did engage a little bit. My thinking, I did have one conversation with the manager pre-CIP, and my thinking was that the cost of the master plan was quite large, and that if a park were to exist there, then we have to accept that infrastructure has to go in all parts of the county. So the thinking, at least from my part, as I had conversations with the Civic Association, we promised or talked about a park 10 years ago there, and mulch and the salt dome were part of the sort of piece of conditions that would lead to the park being there. You get the resource, but you also have to accept what's there, and the cost of the overall master plan, at least as I recall, was $40 million.
All right, thank you. I think we can go. All right, colleagues, we've got like 3 project slides. Let's see if we can get through all of them, and then we'll ask questions, maybe even 4 of them. Go ahead.
All right. So I think we are up to the next slide now. And this is, I'll briefly cover the out years of CIP, and these are generally FY30 to FY34. Projects here include master plan design and construction of Quincy Park. This is expected to be about a $38 million project to improve the arrangement of existing uses and enhance the natural and casual use areas, and to look for more efficient circulation and parking. Penrose Square Phase 2 moves to FY30 from FY26 in the last CIP. This new timeframe is driven by a hold on the adjacent development that will provide the new parcel of land for the future that the future park would occupy. The CIP provides about $5.5 million to develop the master plan adopted by the board in 2019, and that was for Shortbridge Park for the $5.5 million. And then over $5 million for Shirlington Park remains in the CIP and FY32 for master plan design and construction. $14 million is anticipated for the Fairfax Drive public space in FY32 to follow through on the new park called for in the Clarendon sector plan. In FY34, there's a placeholder of $2 million for a to-be-determined park or parks on Langston Boulevard. This will give time for development changes, land use changes called for in the planned Langston Boulevard to take place, yet allow the county to plan for park development along that corridor when we get there.
So you're assuming that's going to be purchased land or something because of a development?
It could be purchased land. It could be land created out of changes to some of the right-of-way configuration, or it could also be land obtained through private development with a permanent public access easement similar to Crystal City. So it is just a acknowledgement that we want to be able to plan for it when it arrives.
Thank you.
I have a question that's also a little bit methodological. So a lot of these are out years, right? Is there any thinking of trying to kind of streamline the master plan or the planning of parks that are kind of similar? Let's take Quincy and Virginia Highlands, for example, to do them in one sweep, have them planned, et cetera. Is there any benefit to that, or is it just a not very good idea doing?
There are some challenges with that. One is each park and surrounding community and the users, particularly the users there, are different. And so there's different conversations with it. And sometimes issues may bleed from one project to the other that you may not have come up on a certain project if you were just individually addressing it. The other one, and you may be alluding to this, if not, please forgive me, doing master planning early and then planning in out years is something we have looked at. But the challenge with that is if you wait 9, 10, 11 years, community interests, things like pickleball weren't there when you did the master planning work. And when you go to do the design, your design really turns into another master planning process or is bogged down by more community conversations. So there is some, I would say, even though it seems like a long time, it does seem like there is an efficiency to go to master plan, have it adopted by the board, have the support, move right into design where it's more of an update informed kind of process, and then right into construction. It helps streamline the design process to being more of a technical permitting construction kind of prep for a project. So there are things we could look at, but generally we kind of found that sequencing and separation is probably more efficient getting through them than doing them all in one batch. But
the thinking was not, I understand that different communities, different places, et cetera. What I also know is that parks is now, and landscape architecture, et cetera, is now a very highly technical and involved discipline. It is expensive to plan parks. Therefore, I'm trying to find efficiencies in lining up projects in a way that we make the most out of the talent that we need to employ in order to get this done, instead of going one piecemeal, one at a time. That's just that. But I'm happy that you are thinking about that. You're looking at this.
I broke my own request to not ask any questions, Maureen. I started it. Go ahead.
Yeah, Quincy Park. I know that there's also a study and engagement around the future of libraries, and obviously Central Library is very critical to Quincy Park, and that entire area is kind of, as a user, it's pretty seamless. It all feels like basically the same space. So I guess I'm wondering kind of what is the plan on integrating Central Library into the discussion of Quincy Park?
So there's a couple different ways that would or could happen. And obviously this master plan work would not start to FY30. So there is a little bit of time to see what library's planning direction takes them or facilities planning on the needs for that building. There has been an investment in the library. So it might be different if we were going to start tomorrow versus when we start in FY30. When we, for example, we already have staff participating in the library's planning process, for example, the evening meeting that they had in that engagement. So we try to stay current on what's going on and working with our colleagues in libraries. So I won't say specifically, but we will certainly look to how it can work as an efficient site and a good site. And it's one of the reasons why we would like to look at circulation and parking, because there could be some efficiencies that provide extra space or make things better for all the users and bring prominence there. So.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we can move on.
Okay. All right, let's see. I think I was up to Williamson Boulevard. Let's see. Oh, Virginia Highlands. We talked about it a little bit. One of the things I will mention to Mr. Karantonis' question is that this is one of the ones that we have, or when we do our planning, we're incorporating 2 small parcels that are not attached to the park at Ives and 20th and Ives and Dominion, I think. So that way we're looking and planning all 3 at the same time, rather than doing 1 and then 3 small plans, to have better efficiency both for cost and talent, but also for we're not doubling up uses. So it's one way we're doing that, similar to the 3 urban parks.
Great. Okay.
Okay. DPR has several mini programs under the umbrella of our major program categories that I talked about earlier. The first of these programs under our Parks Master Plan program is Emerging Uses Program. And the CIP provides for $5 million over the 10-year CIP. This begins with $1.5 million in FY25 and is funded every other year. This is the second CIP to include this program and was essential to the county being able to quickly address pickleball and some of the challenges to the park system that new sport brought with it. Future use of the program funds may address issues such as mountain biking, for one example. In a way to do it sustainably, I should say. The second program is a natural resiliency program, and the CIP calls for $1.5 million starting in FY26 and is funded every other year after that. This program allows the county to invest in its natural capital, such as trees, meadows, and streams, and DPR has begun using these funds to repair severe erosion in some of our smaller streams. in our park system, and we anticipate many more improvements that support our natural environment and add biophilic elements to the parks. A new program to this category is the Parks Athletic Courts Program. To date, DPR has either made improvements to our existing courts only when a whole park renovation is undertaken, or minor improvements via operational dollars. This program will set up a systematic approach to renovation and conversion of existing courts, or adding new tennis, pickleball, basketball, volleyball, or futsal courts, or new sports that we have not yet envisioned. Next slide.
Just a small one. So how does the emerging uses and the Parks Athletic intersect? Do they?
The
The two programs, the emerging uses.
Oh, okay.
And the Parks Athletic Courts.
So the Parks Athletic Courts, we already have a pretty big, a very large inventory of existing basketball, tennis. Now we'll have pickleball courts and futsal that has turf and things on it like that. This was a way to make sure we're investing with the new pressure on them. We're investing in them to keep the ones we have maintained, and then to add new ones if, for example, when we move to maybe our next phase of our pickleball work. Emerging uses funded, for example, the courts with the pickleball the first time because that use was emerging. I'm not sure how long it could keep emerging, and so we will probably need to move on. At some point, it will be here, and it will be just part of our regular inventory.
Now it's resilience.
It has resiliency, and so the emerging uses will need to move on. For example, we have our natural trail study, and I'm not saying this will be for certain, but in that a large question has come around mountain biking in our trails, but we want to make sure we're doing it sustainably. But this CIP doesn't have mountain biking as a line item, so emerging uses is something that could be applied to that. So there's at some point in time, emerging uses turn into regular programs.
So the first one is basically to expand capacity, and the second one is to optimize capacity.
It's to optimize it. That's a good way to look at it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have to talk about it, but my favorite is the Natural Resiliency Program. I think that's huge and really important. Thank you. Okay.
Can I ask on the
Yep.
on the natural resiliency program? I think there's been a lot of concern about the streams and about kind of the restoration work versus prevention and how it interacts. Since wonderfully many of our streams are near our parks, how they interact. I think the one that has most recently been raised is the question of Madison Park being above Gulf Branch and Gulf Branch Nature Center, and that we're kind of starting at Military Road to do restoration work without starting at the top of the watershed to do prevention work. Can you share, again, it's this coordination question that we get to do because we're in an urban county. How do we do the best job there, and is there anything we can do to get those projects more aligned?
So the one clarifying point, the natural resiliency program is mostly addressing areas of particular erosion issues. There's a lot of outfalls in our smaller streams that are off the main branches or the main the main stream valleys of the larger system. So the the natural resiliency program is addressing spot severe erosion issues. Maybe we have an outfall in a park and we're dealing with something. DES manages the much larger stream restoration work that's going on in the county. They have a priority for certain streams like that. We do work with them a lot, and we are part of their team that's looking at the one near Glebe Road Park and things like that right now. So we do have a lot of coordination, and we have been talking to them about some of the ones that we're doing underneath the emerging use natural resiliency program to make sure we're in coordination, or we're not going to be doing something that may impact what they're doing downstream or upstream. So there is coordination there. We are still, this is the first round of this, we're still learning how all that works together. I do want to just also, caveat that the natural resiliency is not just for the stream restoration. It is it's a smaller portion of what we're doing because we're also looking at improving meadows and creating new meadows. We're looking at some invasive plans and reforestation. And so when we are working on our projects, we're reaching out to make sure we're aware of all the other things that are going on, but it is not necessarily the large, robust program that the county is going through, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense that that's different. I guess it's still a question, though, how we can coordinate better on the sites that are adjacent. So have we thought about the stormwater management at Madison before we do the restoration?
Yeah,
It may be a DES
I think we
question.
did, unless I'm remembering a different park, but go ahead, Eric.
So I'm not sure. I think I think we can always improve our coordination, and so we do talk regularly with our colleagues in DES to make sure we're working through these different projects. Let me, if I may ask, are you talking about like the playground work that we're doing at Madison? Is that the project
You're
you're
talking about like catching water. in it,
It's catching
right?
water, yeah. So upstream of Gulf
Okay.
Branch is, the top of the watershed is Madison, or roughly the top. And we've got all those surface lots, and we've got, old building and that sort of thing. And so I think community members had raised the question of, before we invest billions, millions, whatever it is, to do the stream restoration, it's millions, not billions, could we also manage the water on our own property?
Certainly, yes. I think that's something when we're doing our projects. I know when DS is doing their renovation projects, they're looking at stormwater capture parking lots and playgrounds and all that. So there is obviously an incremental approach of trying to manage that water. Are there larger opportunities to singularly capture? There may be, and that's something I think we just need to keep working through.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, next slide. Other mini programs in the CIP are the Trail and Bridge Program, which is funded at $20 million over the 10-year CIP. This program provides for the pavement and bridge assessments, trail repaving, and bridge replacement. Synthetic Turf Program funds $20 million over the 10-year replacement for our 17 synthetic turf fields and the conversion of the Kenmore Middle School field to synthetic turf. The proposed CIP requests funds for nearly $14 million over the 10-year CIP for land acquisition. This is up from $5 million over the FY23 to FY32 CIP. I'll go into a little bit of detail on each of those. This slide here shows more details regarding the 10-year synthetic turf replacement schedule. And I think the key takeaway here is that in FY25, we're anticipating the replacement of the Greenbrier Park Stadium, the lower field of Thomas Jefferson, and Longbridge Park Field number 3, as well as the conversion of the Kenmore Middle School fields. Next slide. Like the synthetic field program, DPR has mapped out our trail and bridge program. In FY25, we expect it to start the design work to replace bridges in Douglas and Glencarlin Park, followed by 2 more bridges in Douglas Park and 1 in Upper Pymmet Run Parks in 26. 26 will also see the construction begin for 3 bridges in Rock Spring Park. Related to the bridges, design of a low water ford will commence in Glencarlin Park. Construction will start on 1 in Barcroft Park. While the replacement work is taking place, repairs to bridges that don't warrant replacement will be ongoing throughout the 10 years. And trail work is expected on the lower 4 Mile Run, Glencarlin, and Bluemont trails in FY25, followed by repaving on 4 Mile Run in Barcroft Park, along with Virginia Highlands and Fillmore in 26. Our paving condition index re-evaluations are set to take place every 4 years, and bridge and ford inspections will take place every 8 years. Okay, next slide. I'd like to take a moment to provide some details on the Park Land Acquisition Program. As many people are familiar with, a priority action in the 2019 Public Spaces Master Plan is to add 30 acres of public space over 10 years from that plan's adoption. It's worth noting that at the halfway point of that goal, the county has added 23.5 acres of publicly accessible land. Over 14 acres of that are new county-owned land, and over 9 acres of publicly accessible space have been added via public easements. The largest acquisition was 7.5 acres of forested land previously owned by VDOT between North Glebe Road and along a tributary to Pymmet Run. Next slide. This slide shows a detailed history of the parcels secured by the county since 2019. 23 individual parcels have been added to the county's inventory. 17 are owned outright by the county, and the remaining 6 have permanent public access easements on them. These additions have greatly increased residents' ability to access and enjoy parks in the county. Next slide. One of the issues DPR has been putting a large emphasis on is the evaluation of how equitably the CIP and previous PAYGO requests invest the resources made available to DPR. During our master planning process, we are striving to look through the key questions, ensure we are reaching groups who don't traditionally participate in our processes, and examine the impact our choices have on various commitments and demographic groups. Additionally, you may recall from my PAYGO presentation that DPR has implemented a park assessment that incorporates not only the physical condition rating of our assets, but adds an equity factor to examine the characteristic of the neighborhoods those assets are located in. This evaluation strives to ensure that neighborhoods that have the greatest ethnic diversity, greatest household diversity, greatest number of children, and lowest average income are priority to receive investment. I do want to note that as the CIP is a 10-year tool, we do the equity assessment is one of the tools that we use. We also have to look at locations where we have aging infrastructure and other inclusion of larger things like sector plans, and so those all come together for the CIP. Okay, next slide. The park assessment I described in the previous slide was initially designed to inform maintenance capital projects. which generally apply to the renovation of existing parks, which means it cannot directly be applied to the CIP that contains these parks that do not exist yet. However, it still can be an informative tool. By applying the assessment to the master plan projects contained in the CIP, what we see is that many of the existing parks are those that have older equipment or are in need of replacement and may have higher equity factors, and that many of the new parks are located in neighborhoods with more priority equity factor scores. And so that it's sort of a balance that we've created in the CIP, dealing with things that are deteriorating infrastructure and areas that have a need. Next slide. As I start to wrap up, this slide shows the proposed CIP's recommended 10-year plan across DPR's 5 major programs. The 10-year total investment is proposed at $308,750,000, with $24 million in FY25 and $27 million in FY26. Next slide. This slide shows a 10-year program summary. My key takeaway is that while this is a robust program, with much of it funded by the county, DPR, working with its partners such as APS and CPHD through the 4.1 site plan process, is able to plan for over $38 million in outside funding, and that is where that 11% figure came from the earlier slide. Next slide. So my final thoughts to leave the board with is that the proposed CIP requests over $308 million over 10 years, with $24.5 million planned for the 2024 bond referendum. CIP is steadily making progress in structuring investment in the face of fluidity in the development market. This is particularly true in Crystal City, where park development relies on obtaining park parcels via development. CIP honors the National Park Service as it relates to the boathouse and private development community for Gateway Park. It continues to invest in programs with large community interests, in the Emerging Uses Program and Natural Resiliency Programs. And related to that community interest, to the subject community interest, it established a Park Athletic Courts Program. And lastly, it reinvests in the Land Acquisition Program to help reach the goals established in 2019 SMP. So this concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Don't go away. We have a number of commissioners here, and I think I'll invite everybody to come up to the table. I think we've got 3 seats, and we have Jill Barker, John Mingus, and Phil Klingelhofer. I think I've seen you all here. Come on, there's 3 seats here, and why don't you just join us at the table, and we'll go that way, if that's okay, guys? And then we can just have questions and have a discussion. Yeah, there are 2 down here. You don't mind? Yeah.
This is John. I'm actually on Teams. I'm not in the room.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Nope, that's all right. Why don't you go first?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk today. I don't have a whole lot to add beyond from Eric's presentation. From the perspective of the Sports Commission, this is a very positive CIP. We're glad to see the projects at Kenmore starting. That's going to be a very exciting project from the sports community side. Same with the boathouse. Like you said, it's been around a long time, and it'll be very exciting to see how that plays out. Also, recognizing it'll have to go through a planning process, but that new park at 26th Street and also Quincy Park, remembering the opportunities there, thinking about the opportunities there. And also the synthetic turf program, having those turf fields and having them maintained in good shape is very important to sports users. The one thing I want to add that's about something that's missing from this, and is in the PSMP, they talked about, one of the sections talked about adding lighting to additional fields. And I understand that can't happen right now until what it takes is a zoning change, bottom line. While the actions the board took last fall to allow a use permit process, that's great. That allows the updating of lighting on existing fields, but it does not allow for new lighted fields. And to be real blunt, specifically it's Williamsburg. So
John,
I
could
would
you say that just one more time, just a little more?
Sure.
It does not allow for?
It doesn't allow to create lights at the use permit process doesn't let you put lights on new fields. So you couldn't use the as my understanding of the use permit process is you couldn't use that to put the lights on Williamsburg.
Okay.
So you have to go through the zoning changes envisioned in the PSMP to do that. And I recognize there's all kinds of things on the staff that has to go through that process, but it would be wonderful if that change could happen sooner. Could happen, say, by the next CIP, because not having Williamsburg lit is is a problem. I mean, there's capacity not being used.
Yep.
So that's my one negative, but otherwise I'm very happy with this CIP.
Thank you. When I got on the board 12 years ago, Williamsburg lighting was one of the big issues. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, with that, we'll go, and don't go away, because we may have some questions for you, too. Ms. Barker, do you want to talk? What about with Parks and Rec Commission? Yep, you got it. It's on.
Is that working?
Yes, it is.
Hi. My name is Jill Barker. I'm the chair of the Park and Recreation Commission. The Park and Recreation Commission reviewed the county manager's proposed capital improvement budget, and we sent you a letter dated June 9th, and we appreciate the opportunity to comment in writing and today. We would like to note that the truncated timeline made it very difficult, and would ask that next time we try to have the opportunity for a commission meeting in between the introduction of the budget and the time the comments are due. But we do feel like we did get the comments we needed to make in. The PRC is generally very supportive of the budget, and there are a few areas I would like to highlight. Especially first, we so appreciate the county manager and the Department of Parks and Recreation taking seriously our concerns about using capital spending to protect natural capital such as trees, streams, and parklands that provide ecosystem benefits which enhance our health and increase our property values. We are particularly mindful of the county's leading edge efforts to achieve bonding for such projects, and we appreciate the county taking deliberate steps to ensure that funding for natural capital projects is successful. This is big.
Yep.
We look forward to enhancement of this funding in coming years. As a general principle, we would like the preservation of natural capital to be considered a priority in all DPR endeavors, and this would include a massive expansion of funding for invasive plant removal, given the devastating impact that these plants are having on the health of our parklands. Yeah. Additional parkland acquisition is always a top priority of the PRC, and while we appreciate the increased 10-year funding, we request that additional funding be held in this account in the near term. We've only got $1.5 million for the near term. We very much approve the master plan for park development and its emphasis on equity scoring to ensure that the parks are prioritized for areas with heat islands, lower incomes, and increased density. We continue to advocate for increased cooperation between DPR and DES to protect streams and trees in Arlington parks. Our letter recommends increasing the DES planning budget to deliberately enhance and protect parks' environmental services, which are natural capital assets, in the DES planning process. It's a little outside of our bailiwick, but it seemed like a good place to try to begin to work together. We are very dismayed that the Green Streets program and the DES part of the budget is slated for reduction, because we view this as, and other uphill catchment systems, as important tools for addressing erosion in the park streams. And we remain critical of the proposal to create an underground water detention vault underneath Woodlawn Park, which is a natural area, and prefer to see such systems installed beneath built infrastructure, such as parking lots or fields, as at Cardinal School. But we support the county's consideration of the Virginia Hospital Center's behavioral wellness facility next to Long Branch Nature Center, and we endorse the neighborhood's 4 points of concern. And we thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here today, and all the hard work that's represented by the budget that's proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Klingelhofer.
Thank you very much. I am Phil Klingelhofer, Chair of the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission, or FNRC in our acronym swamped community where we are. The FNRC is very pleased with the inclusion of so many nature-oriented elements in the proposed CIP. And what I'd like to do is really focus on 4 points that I want to convey from the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission. that are important for us to be looking towards. First is natural capital. It's really great that the CIP recognizes the importance of natural capital and includes funding for the Nature Resiliency Program. However, the county should go farther by explicitly evaluating the impacts on natural capital and potential for enhancing that natural capital in every capital project and element. For example, making the enhancement of natural capital a formal requirement for the 3 small parks in Virginia Square or Ballston, wherever it actually is. That might result in those parks including a small native plant meadow, a Miyakawi, I'm sorry, I always pronounce this wrong, Miyawaki, so that's it, Miyawaki Forest, or some other features that delights and educates park users and adds to the county's natural capital. The same approach should be used for all park projects. The next item I want to address, and Jill just mentioned this herself, is the land acquisition. The big increase in land acquisition to $13 million is a major step forward. But trends are all in the wrong directions, such as loss of tree canopy and others that you've heard about. With property values rising, land acquisition will only get harder and more expensive. Now is the time to snap up as much land as possible, as quickly as possible, before property values rise even further. Arlington has only a small window of opportunity to lock in the needs we will have for parklands and open space in decades to come. Investing now will pay enormous dividends in perpetuity, and the county board members who support increases in land acquisition budget now will earn the gratitude of many generations to come. A third point I want to bring up is the need to apply for EPA grants. The Environmental Protection Agency is now offering $2 billion for environmental and climate justice activities to benefit disadvantaged communities through projects that reduce pollution, increase community climate resilience, and build community capacity to address environmental and climate justice challenges. A successful application for funds to acquire more land for parks in neighborhoods with low equity scores could be a big win-win for Arlington. It could enhance the quality of life and resilience of those neighborhoods, reduce historic inequities, offer opportunities for a growing county's overall tree canopy coverage, which we all know brings a host of benefits such as reducing the urban heat island effect and stormwater flooding, and produce substantial new resources for the CIP budget. And the last area I want to bring up is investment in the nature centers. Both the Gulf Branch Nature Center and the Long Branch Nature Center have been sadly neglected, with many exhibits dating back to the 1960s, which is almost as old as I am anyhow, and maybe some other people at this table. A modest investment of $750,000 for each of the 2 centers to upgrade or expand facilities, educational programs, and exhibits would be an investment in the future that would pay off significantly. I want to thank you for this time to share the FNRC recommendations, and I also want to thank you all for your service to our community and our future, withstanding so many hours of meetings that you probably can't believe it if you ever do add it up. So thank you for that.
That's why we don't add it up. Thank you so very much. All right, colleagues, questions, comments for our commissioners, for our staff, for the good of the general order? I do have these nice little timers if anybody wants to borrow them. And
I'll start with a.
yeah, start. Go ahead. It's coffee.
You know, I think the land acquisition question is a really complicated one, obviously, because we are not creating any more land, and we have many, many uses that we have for our existing land. And the Public Spaces Master Plan identifies the amount of land acquisition that we would like to have, but does it identify any parcels or particular areas that PSMP would like us to be acquiring? You know, like, have we gotten down to that kind of granular, like, what would 30 acres look like?
So in the Public Spaces Master Plan, there is an appendix for land acquisition in that there are multiple pages broken up by category. And so there are specific areas of the county that have a circle identified around them.
Yeah.
And they indicate generally a parcel or several parcels, and they're broken up into additions for recreation and leisure, for natural space, for historic resources and things like that. Historic resources being around cemeteries and some other things. And then there's some generational targets in there. So there is a identification of specific parcels in the PSMP, and then a set of criteria for ones that may come before the county and the board that are not included specifically. There's a set of criteria that they can be applied to them to see if it is would be a priority for the county and in our resources that we have.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to just follow up with that, if I might. I know we talk about a green ribbon, particularly in Crystal City. Are we thinking about over time, sort of a green ribbon that kind of goes through the whole county? Would be a cool thing, but. You just turned yourself
I just turned myself off.
Yeah.
There we go. So yes, if you, there are different variations of that. So for example, in the public space master plan, the adopted guidance actually does have a outer loop and an inner loop in it. That is a way to connect trails around the county in a large loop or in a smaller loop. And that is a mix of parks, on-street, future potential development changes that allow connections. The green ribbons that are more specific to like the Pentagon City Sector Plan and some of the other conversations around Crystal City, they are mostly kind of associated with the sector plan update. So that was a probably more specifically detailed conversation where those would go, because that plan called for land use changes and relocations of building structures and roads that created a space and a good path for a green ribbon. So the PSMP has a macro one with a goal to do the inner and outer green ribbon. And then there are these other documents that have, addressed sort of more specific green ribbons in specific areas.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, I'm going to just kind of work down the table, which would mean Takas comes next. Is that all right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. A lot to digest. Thank you so much for your letters. On the nature centers, it comes back and back and back. And I understand that both buildings are complicated to attack because they are in the middle of the forest right now. So these are not easy projects. So what is our plan for these?
So I believe around the Long Branch Nature Center, I believe in I think you're going to hear about that shortly. There is some money identified for doing a structure assessment of the nature center itself to look at the condition of the building and its sort of long-term viability and how that conversation may come into connection with the future work at the Virginia Hospital site there. And so there is a sort of a little bit more near-term plan to look at the nature center and how that might ultimately resolve itself over the years. Gulf Branch, right now, there is money has been invested to keep it open and operating, but there is not necessarily a plan laid out to, if there was to do an expansion or changes to it. I might need confirmation from DES. There's not an assessment for Gulf Branch in the CIP, but I don't believe at this point there is a plan to go in and do any major changes to Gulf Branch, because that center in particular has massive ADA and other constraints and is a much bigger physical challenge to probably address that building there.
It's a historic house, right?
So I think they both are.
They're both
Yeah.
historic.
Yeah.
At least the core structures
Yeah.
are historic. So that's food for thought, because especially we have an opportunity with the VHC project to maybe approach the Gulf Branch, the Long Branch Center in a different way, right? I think this is a moment to think about that more carefully. I mean, it will depend on how the final project over there will pencil out and form. The second thing is, I love that you mentioned the Miyawaki forests. We have been talking a lot about, forcing, reinforcing some rapid growth groves in selected places. I understand that not every single place, every single park is a good place for them. Do we think strategically about that, or is it just an option that we put on the table and we do as we go?
Just turn myself off again. I know it's a habit to hit the button every time. So I think with the Miyawaki Forest, I think it provides an opportunity, particularly through the Natural Resiliency Program, because when we talk about reforestation, that is part of that category. I'll be very, honest is probably the wrong word, very forthright. We are walking into the natural resiliency and laying out the projects carefully and thoughtfully right now. And so we have gotten a few off the ground with our stream erosion. And we are evaluating where to go next with that because we want to make sure we're doing it right and we're doing it in a way that's in concert with many other programs and things that are happening in the county. So I think that is a very large opportunity to be able to look at some of the Milwaukee Forest through that program. It also is an opportunity to look through our individual projects in the CIP because we have 50 different projects in here that could have a conversation about Milwaukee Forest in them when we're doing our maybe master plan work or our design work, because some of them don't have master plan, we're doing renovations, but it could be a conversation in the design work. I think particularly with the adoption of FNRP, there are things that we will look at in that effort, both master planning and design, that we will bring to the forefront now that may have come up through community thought or community requests, and there may be now to put that more forthright, bring that to the community, rather than having the community come to us and say, hey, we want to do this thing, Milwaukee Forest, we could put that as one of the options going as part of the plan development. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to advance that in this CIP, both directly through the natural resiliency, but also in the individual projects that we have going forward. And Milwaukee is just one example. There could be other things too that we could be looking at. Metal reclamation happens to be another one that's in that vein for us.
I'm just mentioning the pocket groves. I call them pocket groves, not Miyawaki, because Miyawaki is a method of doing that, not actually the product. So there is a correlation with equity challenge places with higher heat indexes. So a meadow doesn't produce the same beneficial effects of that. It has other, biodiversity, etc. But I hear that with a lot of interest, and I think we should be further encouraging you to do that kind of targeted design work to find a way to locate them, so that we have at least a first group of potential. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. First question on land acquisition, the 13, and this is, could be you, it could be DMF, could be Mark, might know off the top. The 13.1 million, is that, as it's put into the bond, is that flexible such that it could also be for easement acquisition related to transportation or not? I'm not saying that we don't want to meet our 30 acres, but I just don't know how it's categorized.
So for easement acquisition for transportation, I actually would have to ask if the land acquisition is a separate, called out in the referendum for that. Don't know.
That's an email.
He says not.
It's not. So it sounds like it would be flexible.
It could be flexible to be for either purpose, and I can follow up with an email just to confirm that.
Okay.
Then the second question is, came up last night, I had Open Door Monday, Madison Community Center, we have 4.7, I think, million for HVAC, et cetera. It is, we had 76 years, I think, that we haven't really revised or revitalized it. And on the inside, there's some types of things that, like the weight room, the bathroom facility, those sorts of things, I'm not clear whether it would be most appropriate to do a study, whether a refresh on the inside that would not be a CIP, because it might not be a 10-year set of work. Those, and there are a couple other items that were raised by folks, and there's some operating costs, and I'm mindful of equity, but I do think investing in all parts of the county is worth it. So do you know if those sorts of investments are, specifically those two types of investments, would be a CIP type thing? Or should I email? What's best?
So I think that would take a little bit of additional conversation, we'll review of what the improvements needed would be, and then some additional conversation with our folks and our colleagues in the facilities group for DES. There has been investment in the basic bones of the building, HVAC and other things up at Madison. However, refresh, it depended on what the magnitude would be, or if there was some phasing. I think we would need to have some dialogue with them and kind of come up with a plan and to see how that would best fit.
And a study to assess that, would that be a CIP or an operating type expense?
I think that's a bit of an open question right now.
Well, you could do it in either place.
Okay.
Yeah, because we have facility assessments that we fund in the CIP. I've seen a lot of the letters from the near neighbors of the Madison Community Center, and I only had to smile because it was at least 8 times that I offered to the schools if they would take Madison Center for $1 from us for future school capacity issues. That is a facility which is clearly, it's underutilized and needs some investment. It's not in our 10-year CIP, not because there isn't a need there, but in the ranking of our facilities and programs, it didn't quite get up to the level where we would have to do it. And I think there's some fairly significant questions about what the future use should be of that. Programmatically, I think parks, we just use a few rooms in that facility.
We do. We have several rooms that we use. There's a half-day preschool, a senior program, weight and fitness, and some summer camps.
Right. At the same time, there's no other community center up in that part of the county.
So I'm trying to find a middle way that there's operating questions and then there's targeted capital investments that I thought that they asked for that seem within reach. And then a redo of a gym seems outside of reach to me, at least at this stage. But I'll follow up. Thanks.
Thank you. Susan?
Kind of going back to the natural capital question, I think it sounds like both commissions have shared the enthusiasm for really thinking about those natural resources as infrastructure, and I know several of our departments have as well. Can you lay out a little bit, like how are we stepping into that? Have we done an inventory? Do we have targets? Do we have measurements that enable us to know how we're doing our goals?
Well, as I'm sure you're familiar, there's been a lot of work around the tree assessment, tree study that will be coming as far as the FNRP and FNRP recommendations. And so we are getting a good understanding. Obviously, I think I mentioned we have 250,000 trees in the county, as well as an idea of sort of the tree equity study and where some of that may go. We're also looking at obviously, the part of the FNRP also qualified or I guess categorized the natural resource areas and things like that. And so there are some acreage measurements we have and things like that. I think the way that we want to approach it is, one of the things is introducing trees and bushes as natural capital has been something that's relatively new. In natural capital being in the way you would actually capital project or capital pieces of projects that would be paid for that way. And so for us, it is making sure that we are consciously, and part of the PSNP talked about this, we are consciously trying to make decisions to put that in our front of our thinking when we're working with communities. And obviously, I think we're seeing a lot, hopefully in our work, but also across the country, of ways that things like fields and playgrounds and things are fitting into a more natural providing additional natural benefits around them and integrated as part of it. So I think for us, it's two things. And one is we are continuing to progress on, how do we quantify the natural capital? And then it is how do we make sure, even maybe we don't have it quantified yet, we understand its health, mental, physical benefits of having that and making sure we're being forward thinking in our design and planning rather than what's left become space for trees. It's how do we do this all together, not just trees, but streams and all the other things that go with it.
Great. And a second question on sort of measurement. I think there'd been conversation about the trail condition inventory that we're doing it every 4 to 5. It sounds like 4 now. Is that often enough? I know we do our paving inventory more like annually. Would there be a benefit to doing it every 2 years or to changing the level of assessment for some of the higher used trails?
So it's something we could look a little more detailed on. At this point, I personally don't think I'd recommend doing it more than 4 years. The trails generally don't receive the same kind of abuse, heavy trucks rolling over them, delivery trucks, the snow and things like that with potholes that have heavy wear. So when we pave a trail, it generally has a life cycle of dozens of years, maybe some spots here and there you might have to come back sooner than that. And so I don't think there's as much evolution to those trails between every 4 years, but I think every 4 years is reasonable because storms happen, trees fall down or there might be some wear out because a lot of our trails are next to streams and some erosion might happen from the storm. So I think every 4 years does allow us to look at what we have already done to make sure we're not missing anything. I'm not sure doing any sooner because part of what the trails is I'm not sure we would be going through enough repaving if we were doing it every 2 years to really make a dent in it. So we feel we can do enough work to make an impact, reassess it, and keep going. If it's something we find that needs to be done sooner, or I guess even later, we can certainly readjust it. But I think for now, for our planning, we're trying to do it every 4 years.
And are there any technology tools that can help, like, or data sets from CABI or others where everyone slows down at one place?
So we do, well, there are, as far as the assessment itself, there's lots of technological tools. It's sort of this laser thing that drives over the trails with cameras, and it measures the alligator cracking and that kind of stuff. Using some more of that social sourcing of where areas are. Obviously, we do hear that and read a lot of that on the county's social media sites. We do also communicate with our, and I might have the specific name incorrect, but our partners with DES in the Lake Arlington, they make us aware when they're getting a particular hot button on some of their feeds that they're working with in their social connections.
Okay, thank you. A little more on tree planting. On the program that we have where we plant in people's yards, right, which is really good. How are we doing on getting that word out and making sure that we're pretty equitable and people understanding that this is possible and accessing it? I worry some people know about it, some people don't, and the people that know get the trees. And the people that don't maybe need the trees but don't get them.
So I'm actually going to add, that is a question is on the operating side for our Parks and Natural Resources group, and I am not entirely certain all the pieces they're doing, but we will certainly get an answer to that question.
Jill says she'd like to answer it, so let's try.
Feel free.
Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. That's why you're here.
I was formerly on the board of Eco Action Arlington and helped set up the Tree Canopy Equity Program. So I am very familiar with it. And there is an advertisement that's going out on the website right now. And people do have to apply, but there are ways for people to get help for their application. And was that your question?
It was sort of, and I've talked with you before. I mean, sometimes people have actually gone and knocked on doors. I mean, it's volunteers and things, because
yes. It takes
you have to know to go on the website. You have to know,
It takes 4 hours of volunteer time to get one, this was in our pilot, to get one tree accepted for planting. That's how difficult it is to get trees planted on private property.
And is that because of what we do and our application is difficult, or is it getting?
No, there's a lot of literature about it. I'll send you an article that recently came out about why people do not want trees. People in heat islands often refuse trees for a lot of reasons, and they're valid reasons.
And I'm sort of
so you
aware
have
of
to
that.
build trust.
Okay.
And that's why the Eco Action hired the program manager to go into the neighborhoods and get neighborhood captains and all that kind of thing.
Which is great. So we're getting somewhere, but it takes 4 hours a tree.
It takes a lot of effort.
Maybe over time it'll be less, which would be good. Okay, yeah. Takis. Oh, look at everybody's, all the lights are on. Takis.
I mean, to Eco Action Arlington's credit, first of all, this is far less than at the beginning of the program. It was even more. I believe it peaked at 6 hours or so per tree. These are quality trees. They are bigger caliber trees. They need to be placed in a way where there is a high guarantee that they will grow properly, etc. This is really a lot of investment that goes there. And I can only say, in terms of getting people to know that this is available to them, the effort that Eco Action Arlington is putting in is absolutely unparalleled. Not only they have hired people, we actually help them fund this position. They are going door to door. They are going to civic association. I've been at least twice in the same room, and it's in a civic association, especially in Green Valley last time, where there was a person actually explaining to everybody who was attending and listening how this works and how they can access, the program and how they can get trees planted in their neighborhood. I think that's a pretty good effort to do.
No, I think it is. It's
But on the backside, there is a lot of work to make sure that this is a quality planting that will stay there. It's not just a stump or something.
Right.
And placing a tree for it to survive with a very high survival rate. I think that the program has almost 80% survival rate right now, which is unprecedented. This is very high. is really, really a lot of work. And master naturalists and tree stewards are helping there.
Good,
Thanks.
great, thank you. Maureen?
Yeah, and I think the critical part of your point to me is also like, it's not just helping people get through the application, but it's knowing the application exists in the first place. But another thing that I heard a lot from people in the community over the last year is they also need help maintaining the trees that they do have. And I think that might be an operating budget question, not a CIP question. But especially as climate change and the severity of storms and wind get worse, people are spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars to just maintain the trees that they do have and prune and keep them, from falling on their house. And I've heard from some people that they've chosen not to get new trees because they had a bad experience with one, they had to get it removed, and then it cost them hundreds of dollars, and they were like, well, I don't want to go through that again. So I see Mark has...
No, I was just remind, the board you added close to $1 million in the operating budget but for public lands.
For public lands,
Public
yeah.
lands. So working, I know Eco Action has been doing some work in that area, also our naturalists and stewards. But I think there's a lot more room there for us to lean in, at least maybe from a volunteer perspective, to do that.
Yeah, figuring out how we can, because I think, planting the trees is only half the battle. They have to survive and stay there.
Yep, no, that's great, because when I drive around, sometimes I think, they could use a tree, they could use a tree.
I got the visit
Yeah.
from the tree stewards every single year after we and because they're looking at the pruning of the tree at the beginning of the career of the tree of the life, and they are very particular about that, and that's a guarantee. It correlates with the survivability, so that's why they're coming, and they have them on a list, and they do that actually all the time.
Great, good. And then, I'm determined to be done by 5:30. New issue, I'm not even sure it's here. The Hope Garden, where the rock garden is over here across from Bayou Bakery, is that ours? Is that our park, that Hope Garden?
Across
We
from-
put in the water for the Mothers, Moms Demand Action group? You just turned yourself off. There
Did
you
it
go.
again?
Yeah.
So yes, that is obviously on the county's property there, and we do support them through, support the folks that are working there through our landscaping unit with Parks and Natural Resources.
Great. So we had an event there, and people have been putting rocks, including coming from around the country. They were taken.
Did not know that. We will-
150 rocks gone, brought from Parkland, Florida, bought from all over. They were taken.
Okay.
I think it was last year. Nobody knows why or who. So I got a little emotional about it at the time. I think those rocks were taken because they're so powerful. It's such a powerful message, and people are starting to come from all over. So I would like us to try to figure out a way to protect the rocks. I'm not sure what we do. I don't know if we put the real rocks inside and we have what we do, but it just really makes me angry, and I feel like it's something we need to do. But protecting rocks doesn't sound like a parks issue. I'm not at all sure how to do it, but I wanted to surface the issue, and I don't know what to do about it. But
No, thank you. I think I will take that back, and we can work to see if there's something we can do to protect anything that's remaining or anything that comes in the future. And on a side note, there is some money from development resources to do some work in this area that will be coming as part of our upcoming work plan as
good.
well.
I mean, they put back a few rocks, but you can't replace what's put there, and each one was personally, it's just very heartbreaking. So I'd like to find a way to push back on that one. Thank you. All right. On that happy note, Susan. go ahead.
One last question, just elevating the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission question about grants. I know we have been very focused on grants throughout the departments. Can you just comment a little bit on especially the EPA grants and whether we qualify as a disadvantaged community?
So I think that is a program we will look into a little bit more specifically. Historically, we have not had tremendous success given some of our community characteristics on receiving some of these grants. So it has not always been a focus area for us. It's something we will certainly look into. We have obviously worked with some of the earmarks and things like this to help fund some of our projects. But I think this is an area that we can definitely look into.
Okay.
Great. And Mr. Manager, maybe elevating that to your climate team to be cross-departmental.
It's in my book here already.
All right. Thank you.
When Phil brought it up, right? You brought it up, Phil, right? Phil has agreed to be to go to the EPA tonight and knock on the door. No, but we'll follow up.
Whatever it takes.
That's the Arlington way. All right, thank you so very much. Thank you very much. Really appreciate staff, commissions, everybody. Great discussion. And we need to keep moving, so we'll bring up our neighborhoods program, people to come on, Arlington Neighborhoods Program, and with CPHD. And thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it. All right, CPHD, Neighborhoods Program.
Well, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, and so Laura, no, come on over here. No, right here. No, she's consulting. Well, Chickway, how are you today?
Doing well, thank you.
Good to see you.
Laura Simpson is here to walk you through one of our favorite programs.
Thank you.
You push the button, and it becomes
If you
red.
want to be
and
heard, yeah,
You are
there you go.
on, yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. So I'm Laura Simpson, and I manage the Arlington Neighborhoods Program. And I'm here today with Samia Bird, there she is, who is the CPHD Director, Chikwe Njoku, who is the Neighborhood Services Division Chief, and Steve Backel, who is our budget analyst.
Welcome, everybody.
I'm going to ask you to yell.
Yell? Speak louder.
Tiny bit.
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, but you're not.
Okay, so the next slide, please. So I did just want to go a little bit over what the program is about. I know that there's often a lot of confusion as to why we are in CPHD when we're doing infrastructure projects versus being in DES. So we are, I think it's an important thing to recognize that this is a unique program of which the projects are an integral part. And we also have a lot of broader work that the program does as part of neighborhood services and CPHD, working with neighborhoods as well as working with them on their neighborhood plans. So with the neighborhood plans, the program started off with developing them and having, it's kind of an exchange where residents and neighborhoods communicate the needs that they have, their issues, their assets, and then the county in exchange provides support to the neighborhoods, recognizing that there are important projects and important needs that those that live in those neighborhoods are able to see. And we're able to then put funds toward it and construct projects. Let's see, next slide, please. So the program has been in existence for 60 years, and during that time, AMP has demonstrated that county government and neighborhood communities can jointly plan, organize, and implement substantial infrastructure projects funded by the county. The value of the program to both residents and the county was reaffirmed through the Neighborhood Conservation Program Review that was completed a few years ago. Since 1989, this program has constructed 527 community infrastructure projects totaling $104 million in Arlington County neighborhoods. Could you go to the next slide, please? So our work with neighborhoods using a bottoms-up approach affects the appearance of how the program allocates capital improvement funds. This process begins with the county commitment of CIP bond funds, and then this commitment gives Arlington residents and their communities confidence to invest in the process, to put representatives into RNAC, and to learn how to work with us and how we build projects. It starts with the community proposing a CIP project that's approved, and then the plans are developed before bonds are issued. So while the process may seem lengthy, it minimizes financing costs by issuing bonds only when the funds are needed for project construction. Next slide, please. So We, as a program, since the beginning, have done a good job in more equal, as an equal distribution of projects across the county, and providing opportunities for neighborhoods and residents to participate in the program. At this point, we're now adding in equity, and to date, we've completed analysis that includes planning and identification within each of the important and key components of the program for areas that need improvement. And the different components of the program, it's the neighborhood plans, RNAC itself, the projects, and engagement with residents. And this past year, RNAC has been in the process of forming an equity subcommittee in which they hope to evaluate new projects coming in. Next slide, please. So this is the funding summary. PAYGO is 10.4 million, with a new bond being requested for 70 million. And we have previously approved bond funding of 17.5 million for a total of 8.7 million. You can go to the next slide, please. In the last 2 years, we've completed projects that are shown on this chart. There's 1 streetlight project, 3 park projects, 5 street improvement projects, and 6 missing link projects. Next slide, please. So to highlight just a few of the program accomplishments over these past few years, this is a 2-block project in Glen Carlin neighborhood on 4th Street. And this project had a new curb and gutter, complete street reconstruction, and it was just a little over $1 million. Next slide, please. So this is another 2-block sidewalk project in Ashton Heights neighborhood. This one also included a rain garden, and this was a project that we collaborated with OSM, Office of Sustainability and Management, and this project was $861,000. Next slide, please. And this is Edison Park. It's a park project in Arlington Forest neighborhood. In addition to the play area, this also included some reforestation and improving an adjacent RPA, dealing with stormwater management and trail improvements to help improve the connection between the park and Lever Run. And this project was $979,000. Next slide, please. So we actually are going to have 2 slides on the mapping. This is a map showing both active projects and proposed projects. Active projects for us are ones that are currently funded. They're either in design or going through construction. And then the proposed are what we have on a first priority list. And as you can see here, when I'm speaking of being equal, we are spread quite broadly across the entire county. Next slide, please. Oh, the interactive map one.
It's okay.
Skip it.
We were going to show you the map again, but we know you know all
How
know
to
how to
use
use
it.
the map.
Yep, it's fine.
So,
Close enough.
Blame the website.
so I will just say for our program on that interactive map, we don't have future projects. We just have ones that are either active or completed, and that's because of the way our process works, where proposed projects have to get qualified and then they're funded. So you're not able to, with this map that I showed, you're able to see where the future ones are, but on the interactive one, not.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so slide 12. So the projects shown here have gone through petitioning process within their civic association. They've received RNOC support. They've been recommended to the county board for approval of bond funds. And at the present time, we have 13 projects that are in various stages of design and 4 projects in construction. And the mix of project types within this group, we have street improvement, intersection improvement, park and beautification projects. Next slide, please. So this is a tabulation of projects that we currently have in our first priority project list. I would like to again note that this list is constantly evolving or changing as projects come off, and then neighborhoods submit new projects, which they do up to twice a year in the spring and fall funding rounds for the program. And as of right now, the funds that we're asking for with this CIP would construct somewhere between half and most of these projects that we currently have on the list. Next slide, please. So this is showing at the bottom of the slide, this is the amount of unsold bonds we have with 12.5 million allocated to active projects. And as each of these projects goes into construction over the next 2 years, those bonds will be sold. And then 5.2 million is what we have remaining and available to us for the upcoming spring and fall funding rounds later this year. Next slide. So our program funding summary for the next 10 years, the new PAYGO is going to be used for staffing the program and creation of new project types that we will add to the existing range of projects we do in collaboration with neighborhoods through the program. And some of this will meet important equity goals, responding to recommendations from the program review that happened a few years ago. By broadening and adding to the types of projects, the value of the program will continue to be strengthened while we increase the number of residents we reach and engage with residents through responding to more projects that we're able to do. The new bond issue of $7 million a year supports a typical mix of projects that we do a year. It's usually in the range of 2 to 3 large projects, such as sidewalk projects, 2 to 3 medium projects, such as intersection, bioretention, rain garden, 1 to 2 park projects, 2 to 3 smaller projects, such as beautification, placemaking, public art, and also the Missing Links program. Towards the bottom, the previously approved funding is the $17.5 million that was described in the previous slide, with the projection for when this will be depleted, which is anticipated over the next 3 years. Next slide. So for the next 4 years, fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 28, the proposed CIP submission is commensurate with what current staff and resources are able to support with that typical range of project types that we just listed over in the last slide, as well as doing some smaller and some infill sidewalk projects under the Missing Link program. So one of our goals is to increase the capability to develop and deliver more projects per year, including new project types as identified in the ANP's 2023 Expanding Project Types Initiative that we did in collaboration with RNOC. And some of these will activate and increase participation in the program through neighborhood projects with shorter duration and less complex processes to execute and complete. Next slide. I'm sorry, if you could stand that side. So for fiscal year 29 to 34, our goals are to make community and county collaboration more effective through the leadership of the program and RNAC, to broaden and enlarge the program to achieve equity goals, to reach residents and increase participation in RNAC by all of Arlington's civic associations over the next decade. And through the way this program is set up with our project collaboration with neighborhood residents that have representation in RNAC, we'll be working to improve non-tangible sides of the program as well, and the benefits that come out of it. One example of this would be education on roles and effective tools for engagement and conflict resolution to have successful project development processes and outcome. And the last slide. So the Neighborhood Conservation Program Review reaffirmed the importance of the CIP investment in Arlington neighborhoods through the leadership of ANP and RNAC. RNAC and ANP staff are jointly working to reinvigorate oversight and management of CIP investments, implementing all the recommendations in the NCPR report. Over the next several years, ANP will procure technical expertise to develop materials and provide training to facilitate participation of underserved residents and communities in this program through RNAC. An example of this is the updating that we plan to do on how civic associations develop or amend their neighborhood plans by making improvements to the surveying process that they undergo, such as what types of questions are being asked, how is the outreach and distribution done, and how can we improve the number of responses and from all the different neighborhoods within a civic association. Civic associations and their leadership have demonstrated resident and neighborhood commitment to continuing and expanding successful CIP investments in their neighborhoods and infrastructure through this program.
Thank you. All right, thank you so very much. And I think we have John Kirkpatrick with us.
John Kirkpatrick.
Yeah. Come on. Have a seat. You're on.
Okay, great. Thank you, and it was a pleasure having the opportunity to meet with you all earlier last week. We really appreciate that. I am chair of the RNAC, and we work closely with staff in terms of taking in projects, reviewing those projects, and recommending those projects to staff, the county manager, and ultimately you all to pursue. We are very much in support of the county manager and staff's budget for $7 million per year. That keeps us going at a rate of roughly, I think, 4 to 5 projects a year, mix as Laura has said. And right now we have a queue of about 23 priority projects, so that will allow us to get through a large amount in that queue and add on new projects to that. So we're very excited about that. Just like to say that we think that RNAC AMP is a great way to spend money on projects because, first of all, some of the work is done volunteer, so it's free. Also, we used to have some issues with cost overruns. You know, when this was about 15 years ago, when there would be sidewalks that were done, and all of a sudden you had a massive drainage project on your hands. That is not an issue now because we do put in contingencies for that. And so we don't have to come back to you to ask for more funds when we do a project. With staff, we can get that right the first time. And if the contingencies aren't used, then there's savings to that too. So we don't need to ask for as much in the next bond round. So that is really, I think, what we see as a helpful, useful role for RNAC. I'd like to give some examples. Pending projects we have are Glen Carlin, Moses Ball Spring, Highview Park at Slater Park. And these are projects, of course, you haven't seen yet because we will be working to approve these. In Arlington Heights, that's Arlington, South First Street and Glebe Road, which we've talked about, which is a pretty busy intersection. So we really try to use the CIP funds in ways that assist you in your priorities in terms of pedestrian and cyclist safety in the environment and recreation. And we really are trying to stay in touch with that. As you know, we are also very much focused on equity, and we are working out the processes for identifying projects that are equity projects that can take advantage of the $1 million that you have given us in the last CIP, and also allows those neighborhoods with those equity projects to advance those projects much more quickly instead of having to wait for time to accrue in our point system. So with that, I think that is, I don't really feel like you need to go into much detail based on Laura's presentation, and that is really our support of the program.
Great, thank you. It was a great little program. Thank you very much. Colleagues, questions, comments for staff or Mr. Kirkpatrick?
Yeah, I think, John and I talked about this when we met last week, gosh. But I think, our ideal world, obviously, is that everyone in Arlington would be plugged into their civic association and would know everything happening in their neighborhood and would come to all the meetings and respond to all the engagements.
Civic associations would be plugged in, too.
Exactly. And so, I know that's my ideal, but perhaps we may consider that some people aren't participating. And I'm really heartened to see kind of like the level of effort being put in to think about what do we do to engage other people? What are the other opportunities? And I think, there are so many ways to go about that, and I don't want to dictate because I don't know that I know the best way, but I think making sure that there are pathways that are outside of civic associations or in addition to civic associations is really important. There's a lot of different community organizations that have a good pulse, right, on things that might be different problems than what a neighborhood association is bringing to the surface. And so I'm just really glad we're engaging with that work because, until we get everyone involved, there are a lot of people who have been, left out in a lot of civic associations that frankly are just not as organized and well put together as others. And you lose out big time if you don't have really concrete plans and ability to advocate for yourself. And so, that might be realistic for some groups, but for the neighborhoods that I've been in, it hasn't been as realistic. And certainly the folks that are participating are not representative of the full and complete neighborhood in many cases. So I just, applaud that and want to definitely stay in touch and keep working on different avenues that we can pull people into the conversation.
I would say that's definitely an area that we want to work on. And we have a lot of good opportunities to do it with, and I haven't given lots of examples here, but with the neighborhood plans and just how we do the outreach, there are a lot of opportunities for us to make some headway on that.
Great, thank you. Douglas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation and really, it seems to be a breakthrough for this program this time that we have the ability to fund it better. This hasn't been the case, a couple of rounds leading up to that. So I have a couple of questions. First of all, I'm happy that we're discussing openly the equity weighing of projects and how, and I literally invite everybody to look at the work that this commission, it's still a commission, right? So has done to actually introduce criteria that allow for fast tracking projects. This is famous million. And that's the question now. If I understand it correctly, that doesn't mean that equity doesn't count for the rest, for the other 6. Right. It is just to fast track some, to make it more accessible. The equity, factors apply to everything that the program actually is appropriate. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And that's part of our equity subcommittee TACUS is to also look at RNAC and A&P policies through an equity lens too. and every project that we have would have an equity focus. It's just that if there are projects that directly benefit what we might consider an equity population, then that project would be able to be accelerated.
Yeah, excellent. And I know that there a lot of thinking is still going into this. The second thing that I wanted to ask is the following. So we discovered in the last few years that when we do some of these projects in-house, we use means of DES, et cetera, to get them done, like for example, missing link projects. That this has a trend to be actually cheaper and or more effective, or getting more more bang for the buck than contracting them out. Does this additional money that we are appropriating here, or intend to appropriate, does this mean that we have to think also about our internal ability, our in-house ability to deliver at least some of these projects?
So there are multiple factors that go into what we're able to do in-house versus the way we do it right now with, like, if it's a very large project, you have to bid it, and then we also have on-call contractors. There are a lot of areas we can look at for efficiencies. We're not really at a point where we're ready to try to really tackle some of that. But we are looking at what a project costs and why it costs what it does. The Missing Link program functions more like maintenance. So it's for very small lengths, so it doesn't have the same stringent requirements that you might have for a very large project. So with the expanded project types that we're doing, I anticipate some of those being able to be done in a different way that would be very cost effective and more in-house, but some of that we're still going to have to see where we land with it. But it's definitely something that we want to do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Matt?
Thank you so much for the presentation, for the meeting last week. I'm thrilled with the proposal. The presentation works. I was up for the 4:30 feeding for my daughter, so there was one extra yawn there. But that's not it's also a reflection of the trust and how pleased I am with where we are at this point. Keeping in mind that funding was a lot tighter, and there was a lot of thinking 4 or 5 years ago. So just a thank you to all of you who have helped make this happen and have us on a good trajectory in the program. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Susan?
I just had a quick question. What's the average elapsed time between when someone raises this as a possible project and when we begin it?
So it ranges. You're talking about from construction beginning or from when a project is funded by the county board?
Yeah, I think from when somebody has an idea that they put forward to the county to when they get a yes. So beginning of design or approval by the board to begin design.
I don't actually have an answer. I can get back to you with that. Over the years, it's kind of moved a bit. So I don't have statistics that I can just pull out right now on it, but I can give you a couple breakdowns because it'll affect different types of projects a little bit differently.
Great, and just a highlight.
I can definitely get back to you.
We'll follow it up.
Yep, I can definitely get back to you.
Thank you. Takis?
The answer to that is not reasonably fast. Actually,
It depends. The answer is it depends.
But increasingly better. So
Yeah. Thank you. I don't have any questions, except I want to thank a time I didn't meet with you. I met with David, I think it was. Yeah.
It was both of us.
Yeah, with both of you, that's right. So anyway, it was great to talk to both of you, and I really appreciate all the work. I've seen this program really come a long way. It is really much better than it used to be, despite some bumpiness. It's way better, and it looks like it's still getting better, which is great. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
I call it Arnak the Magnificent. If you ever watch Johnny Carson, I'm getting way too old.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yep, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, I think we are on to DES. Facilities and energy efficiency.
Yeah, so I'm going to call up the facilities staff here. This presentation is broken up into pieces, so there'll be actually logical stopping points
Okay.
here.
And we'll try to take them, right, guys?
Yep.
Thank you.
And I know we still have Stacy sitting over there, so we have a lot of
Yes.
material to get through, so I'm going to say as little as possible. I think, George, you're going to start us off?
Yes, sir.
Hold the
All right.
microphone close.
All right. Mr. May.
Have a red button there.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
Yes, you do. You're good.
Good afternoon. I'm George May from DES Facilities and Engineering, and I'll lead us off. And can we go to the first slide, please? Second slide. Next slide. Okay. The program that you see laid out on this slide can really be broken down into four major elements. First, we'll be using results from our energy modeling and the decarb tool to increase solar energy capture, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and expand our EV charging. Secondly, while we're continuing and maintaining our state of good repair across all of our facilities, we're also consolidating our emergency response functions in a central Bosman location with a situational awareness and intelligence unit, the Emergency Operations Center, the Watch Desk, and the DIPSM staff. Next, and we'll continuing our improvements based on our previously authorized capital funding for the Courts Police and 2020 14th Street buildings, as well as we're requesting funds for the betterments at Central Library and Madison Community Center. And to distinguish from the discussion you had with Eric Beach about the programs at Madison, our request is focused on the base building and improving its infrastructure. And finally, our request also includes long-term planning for developments in fiscal 31 and beyond, new libraries on Columbia Pike and Crystal City locations, and the Columbia Pike West End Fire Station. We'll also be developing recommendations for our best uses for over and underutilized county staff spaces that will support a plan to vacate the Court Square West building in the next 7 to 10 years. Next slide. The breadth of our facilities, the 89 buildings and 2.3 million square feet, is our ongoing challenge in sustaining county operations, and it's the underpinning of a lot of our facilities management work. Next. The facilities team commitment to equity is best shown on the distribution of our investments across the county. This interactive map can also be used to show its details for individual projects. Karen, can you pull up the Bosman building?
Construction capital.
Yeah. If this is showing us how the map works, we've figured it out,
Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
And appreciate it. If there's something particular you want us to know, we'll get it. Thank you.
We're going to
Let's go to
proceed
the next
ahead.
slide then.
Thank you. All right, next one.
Okay. All right. These two pie charts show both our planned allocation of funds and our sources. And the left chart, while it only shows 6% of our funding for energy and resilience, will describe how these findings are leveraged into our investments for solar capture, greenhouse gas reductions, and the development of our initial resiliency hub at Lubber Run. And this will be covered in more detail in the discussion by the energy and facilities management folks. Our proposed 10-year spend, next. Our proposed 10-year spend plan by areas listed here. On the FD&C line, the higher capital spending in the next 3 years reflects our immediate capital improvement projects. And then an increase out in fiscal 31 and beyond for the future libraries and West End Fire Station. Next slide. These photos show the wide variety of projects our team has completed since our fiscal '23 request. Stephen Burr and Adam Colloway will now discuss how our funding requests for energy and resiliency and facilities management are mutually supportive.
Thanks, George. Next slide. This slide highlights the Energy Performance in County Facilities project. This longstanding CIP program includes analyzing, prioritizing, and reporting the energy performance in county facilities. The focus has been leveraging the decarb tool as a decision support tool so the county can make prioritized decisions about upgrade opportunities at facilities. A key feature of the tool is to create metrics relative to greenhouse gas emissions, energy, and financial costs to inform project implementation. The tool identified two primary types of projects to pursue. One with projects that have shorter payback periods that are generally have lower cost, but also relatively lower GHG impacts. And secondly, deeper decarbonization projects that includes bundled measures and the electrification of HVAC systems. An example of the shorter payback period project is the Equipment Bureau lighting retrofit project, where the facility lighting was implemented with a payback period of about 6 years. That reduced the annual greenhouse gas emissions at the facility by 2.5%, all at a cost around $1,500 per ton of CO2 avoided. The energy savings from this project were also important to help offset the increase of electricity load from the electric vehicle charging at the facility. Also identified through the decarb tool are deeper decarbonizations and HVAC electrification measures that generally result in more energy and GHG savings, but with higher cost. These projects are highlighted on the next slide.
So on this slide, we'd like to present an update on our electrification and decarbonization efforts. The status covers a period starting from the FY23 adopted CIP, when we received board guidance to begin system electrification. We've evaluated different system types, including electric boilers, electric resistance heating, as well as either heat pump or VRF type systems. We aim to perform these projects at the end of the useful life of the equipment, but also consider the impact of the facility and minimize disruption. I'd like to highlight a few projects, including the pilot boiler electrification at the 3700 South 4 Mile Run facility, which is finishing design and permitting phase before it goes through the procurement process. Another project, as we've talked about at Madison Community Center, is the HVAC replacement, about to start the design phase, while also maintaining flexibility with future programmatic use. Some of the smaller equipment we've also focused on include installation of an electric hot water heater at Fire Station Number 2. So smaller effort, but still something that's important for overall facility use. Another item we consider when we are making these decisions is the availability of the power and the coordination efforts required to meet those needs. Overall, this is an ever-evolving status report that will show further advancements as they arise in future projects. System electrification and greenhouse gas reduction is one of the efforts we push to address our energy goals. We also strive to reduce consumption through the installation of on-site solar systems, as shown on the next slide.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Another key project is for the energy and resiliency CIP section is on-site solar installations at county facilities. On-site solar installations will blend both power purchase agreements or PPAs with county-owned installations. PPAs are installed by a third party, do not include upfront capital and ongoing maintenance costs, and are paid through by the per kilowatt hour charge for the generated electricity. County-owned installations are installed, operated, and maintained by the county with capital investments from the CIP. The graphic on the left of the slide is an overview of the screening process that was used to evaluate the county's 89 facilities for solar feasibility. The preliminary solar feasibility screening process analyzed several key factors, including the condition and remaining life of the roofs from the facility condition assessments database to compare to the solar array's anticipated 25-year life. Potential obstructions at the facility and other facility-specific constraints were also included. There were 26 facilities that were identified with the highest preliminary feasibility, with 17 potential PPA candidates based on their size, and 9 candidates for county-owned installations. An accelerated installation is planned in the CIP with the targeted implementation of 4 to 5 solar arrays at county facilities beginning in FY26. To accomplish this, there was a loading order to prioritize on-site solar installations. First,
Ask a
Yes, go ahead.
So the solar screening process, are we also doing this on school APS-owned properties? Can we have a pathway to doing it on APS-owned properties?
I think you just answered your own question and then asked another one.
I
Yes.
saw a very quick head shake.
Yep.
Yeah, so APS has been, I think that they have at least 10 solar arrays already on their roofs, and so they have a process and they've been utilizing PPAs.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've done a lot.
It's a separate process than
Yeah.
our facilities.
Okay, and then the dollars per kilowatt hour, that's what we're earning from the generation of the electricity, or that's what we're paying per generated kilowatt hour?
That's what we're paying. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Okay, since I have you on this, what is the most important criteria that makes us decide for a PPA versus a county-owned facility?
So right now, we looked at the size of the roof. There's a threshold of the capacity of the system, and if it's financially viable for the PPA provider. So the size of the roof was the main determining factor.
So for size and viability of the roof would be rather a point. I mean, if it's bigger and easier to install, it's more likely to be a PPA.
That's correct. Yeah, and PPA vendors
And
have
smaller or more difficult to install is likely to have to be an in-house project.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So for the load area, first we'll focus on facilities that are newly constructed, such as Lubber Run and AOMF. For Lubber Run, we are actively negotiating with our PPA partner and are planning to seek board approval on that agreement during the July board meeting. So
That'd be really good.
yes. Yeah.
It's like next month,
Yeah, yeah.
a few weeks.
July,
Yes.
yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there.
Soon, right?
Yeah, before the hurricanes come. Go ahead. Thank you.
Then we'll focus on facilities with new roof replacements, such as a Coleman Bureau and Central Library. Next, we'll focus on sites that have the PPA viability based on the roof size and larger solar capabilities. And then lastly, with smaller systems that'll be county-owned, and they'll be implemented based on their financial evaluation and cost effectiveness. The table on the right is an example of financial considerations for on-site solar between PPA and county-owned and maintained. The cost metrics are evaluated include the capital and ongoing maintenance costs, which are based on the currently county-owned installations that are at the top of the table. The county-owned installation options were calculated at the same dollar per kWh, so we can compare apples to apples between the PPA and the county-owned and operated. For the three priority sites shown, PPA options have the lowest overall cost alternatives and will also include maintenance. Next slide. This slide shows the anticipated growth of on-site solar installations at county facilities through the end of the CIP term in FY34. It is forecast by the end of FY26, the county will have over 1,000 kilowatts of solar capacity installed at county facilities growing over the 10-year period. On-site solar is also a key component for the county's resiliency strategy. The next slide, the renewable energy assessments and installation CIP projects include CIP funding for site assessments and county-owned installations for $8.6 million. Funding for projects utilizing PPAs are not included, consistent with the blended approach for installations. The project also contains an additional FTE to help manage the solar installations. Circling back to the energy performance project, $5.6 million in funding will continue the analysis and implementation of energy performance measures for both the short payback period projects as well as the decarbonization and HVAC electrification initiatives. There are two resiliency projects that are currently in the CIP, with the first being the Lubber Run Resiliency Hub. The project total is $2.5 million and funded through the Climate Action Fund. The project includes FY25 and FY26 funding to support the creation of a resiliency hub to serve community electricity needs during an event such as a long-term power outage. This will be completed by first leveraging the solar PV system through expanding the current battery storage to support the facility energy demand for approximately 48 hours. Then followed by installing an auxiliary backup natural gas generator to supply any electricity that it cannot be covered by the battery system for the longer duration events. This project will also include device charging capabilities. The next project is the Energy Resiliency Planning and Development for $2.4 million, with the first component of this project to be leveraging a potential federal grant for planning future resiliency hubs and microgrid deployment at county facilities in FY26. Implementation in FY27 and 28 will support additional resiliency hubs developed at county facilities. Funding for a pilot demonstration project of microgrid technologies identified through this project's planning elements is planned for FY29 implementation. Next slide. The last two energy and resiliency CIP projects are the continuation of electric vehicle charger installations for both county fleet and community publicly accessible charging. The map on this slide shows the locations of the installed and planned public accessible EV charging stations through FY25. To summarize the energy and resiliency projects and one funding table, one funding table on the next slide. Here is a list of the 6 projects over the CIP term that have a total cost of $26 million over the 10-year period. The next section, Facilities Management Bureau, will be presented by Adam Kalawi.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I got it.
So I should like to start with a quick,
Yeah.
Sorry. Matt, go ahead.
This may be a refresher. It's possible I asked last year. Are we under construction with PPA projects already, or not quite? We have a partner.
We're not. We have a partner. We're actively negotiating it and planning next month for approval.
Great. Next month, maybe. So the Lubber Run is not.
Lubber Run, yeah.
It will be a PPA.
It will be a PPA. That's the route that we are moving
great.
forward with.
That's super helpful. And then the question on, I think it's appropriate for this area, could be in the next section. The question is, where we, I'll hold it for the next section. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, Woolley, go ahead.
Okay, so I'd just like to start with a quick overview of our planning process that utilizes the facility condition assessment as a baseline, but also add that we do include the recommendations from the decarb tool to look at bundled measures that can maximize efficiency, and again, our GHG reductions. So the chart on the right is from Madison Community Center, again, a building we've talked about a number of times already today. And what you can see from the chart on the right is that our original efforts were more focused on the HVAC system. However, the interior construction is the largest piece of that pie that requires some sort of improvements. We've included portions of those measures in our overall planning effort, and as well as in the recommendations and the projects that we are proposing. And actually, that'll take us to the next slide, which will talk about Madison. The first request is for the roof and the windows at Madison Community Center for $2.5 million. This project is meant to address the leaking and deterioration issues from the roof, as well as help increase the energy efficiency by replacing the single pane windows with dual pane, as well as increasing the insulation of the roof. This project is going to be performed in collaboration with the HVAC replacement to maximize our energy impact. The next project on that slide is to look at 2 systems in one of our more critical facilities, the detention facility fire alarm system for $2 million, as well as the security systems for $300,000 this year and $2.8 million over the next 10 years. Starting with the fire alarm system, it has reached the end of its useful life and support is being discontinued. Due to the nature of the facility, our approach is to proactively address the system rather than reactively. That way we're not concerned with any potential safety issues within the building. The security system has also reached the end of its basic functional useful life, and we're looking to evaluate its fit within the sheriff's department and its needs to determine if maybe a different system or alternative configurations are better options. And again, it's more focusing on the access control, not actual architectural changes to the facility. Both systems, again, are paramount to the safety of staff, inmates, and the public. And the last one on the slide is a request for $3 million in additional funds to replace the roof and make mechanical system improvements at Central Library. As shown on the earlier slide, this would help increase the on-site solar capacity at Central Library, as well as, again, make various mechanical improvements, including HVAC systems and elevators. Next slide. Sticking with Central Library, and again, I know there's a conversation about its adjacency to Quincy Park. We are looking to address and improve the plaza surrounding the building. Currently, we're experiencing some water intrusion issues within the facility as well as the garage. And this project's intent is to address those issues as well as any safety or long-term hazards that may arise. Next, we're also requesting $1.8 million to replace the bay doors within the Equipment Bureau facility. They are original, 40-plus years old, made from steel slats, so no insulation value at all to them. The new doors would have a minimum of an R8 value, which has the potential to reduce heat losses by about 90%. This would help improve the work environment for county employees, as well as put less strain on various mechanical systems. The last one on this slide is for a request for $1.3 million to electrify the boilers at Walter Reed Community Center. It's similar to our efforts at 3700 South 4 Mile Run, from which we'll use various lessons learned to improve the design process, as well as the coordination efforts with our utility provider for any increased power needs.
Can I ask you something on that?
Yes.
What is the alternative electric technology to electric resistance units? I mean, theoretically, they're the least efficient of all electric ones, right?
So we do evaluate various options, and overall, you are correct. It is one of the less efficient, but however, it's also the one that's most
easiest to
install for the overall facility usage. If we were to try and go with a different system, we'd have to remove all of the internal ductwork or any other mechanical systems, and it would cause a significant disruption to the facility, and overall would cost a lot more. So right now, Walter Reed has a hydronic system, so it has water circulating through the facility. If we were to try and go with a heat pump or a VRF type system, we'd have to remove a lot of that equipment and put a completely new system in place. Or one of the options we did look at 3700 was a heat pump style hydronic system, which costs twice as much and requires twice as many pieces of equipment to locate, because you're doing 2 stages of mechanical heat transfer.
Because Walter Reed, I mean, it's a community center. It's very well used. I mean, it has a kitchen, so therefore you need to produce for that. I guess this accounts for 1.3 million worth of a boiler, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Maureen, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a clarifying question. Do you know what fiscal year or years the central library improvements are in? I'm sure it is in this book somewhere, but.
So most of my requests are focused on 25 and 26.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can keep going. Thank you.
Okay. And then let's see, where are we? Slide 21. So this slide highlights the remaining projects in the Facilities Maintenance Capital Program. The top 3 were already discussed during the FY25 PAYGO presentation and work session, so I'll kind of jump past those for now. The one to focus on would be the fire station number 5 bay door replacement for $1.01 million. It's a similar project we've done in numerous locations to replace the existing roll-up doors with the bifold doors and faster response time and less susceptible to accidental damage during the rapid deployment of the crew. Next slide. For the Critical Systems Infrastructure Program, again, the top 2 were discussed during the PAYGO work session. So focusing on the second 2, the first one is a program to replace emergency generators and install roll-up connections at a number of facilities across the county between FY26 through FY31. The first site that's been identified is Fire Station number 4, and then again, various sites through the remainder of the program. The next program is for fire alarm replacements. Similar to the one I mentioned regarding the detention facility, but on smaller sites overall. The first 2 locations identified in FY26 are Quincy 3 and 4, with future sites identified through FY31. And next slide. This is just an overall summary of the Facilities Maintenance and CSI program, requesting $105 million over the next 10 years. Next, I'll pass it off to Adil to discuss the FD&C program.
Okay. Seeing no questions, go ahead.
Okay, should I get started?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you, Adam. I'll be highlighting some of the key projects first, followed by a summary, and then summary of the remaining projects, and then an overall summary of the FD&C program. The projects are organized with near-term projects up front, followed by medium-term projects, and then finally the long-term projects. So for this first slide, we have the Courts Police Building, which is the building located at 1425 North Courthouse Road. We're continuing to renovate approximately 2 courtrooms per year and have started working to address the near-term space needs for the Commonwealth attorneys, including accelerating the renovation of the 2nd floor for the Alcohol Safety Action Program. The next project on this slide is the Detention Center, which is approximately 25 years old. The proposed CIP includes funding for a study which will aim to address functionality shortfalls, improve security measures, and technology upgrades in the building. We've also included placeholder funding for renovations that might be needed at the conclusion of the study. Next, on this slide, we have the Courthouse Complex project, which is the 2020 14th Street building. We will be renovating 2 floors of that building that are currently unoccupied for use by DHS, the court programs, or the DES programs. This and the next projects are precursors to vacating Court Square West building within the next 7 to 10 years. The next project on this slide is the consolidation of the Department of Public Safety, Communications, and Emergency Management, or DIPSM. For this project, we will construct the Situational Awareness and Intelligence Unit and the Emergency Operations Center, in addition to moving the DIPSM staff out of the Court Square West building. The end result will be a consolidated DIPSM consolidation within the Bosman Government Center for a better coordinated response during emergencies. This project will also require Department of Technology Services to be relocated from the 6th floor of the Bosman Government Center. And next slide, please. Okay. The last 2 projects from the previous slides are precursors to vacating Court Square West, which brings us to our next near-term project, which is the office space utilization and systems furniture project. The systems furniture in the county facilities is currently 30+ years old and poses a safety risk with some electrical equipment failures in recent years. As we look at replacing the aging systems furniture across the county facilities, we're looking at our space utilization as well as the county's leased facilities. These combined with our goal to vacate Court Square West in the next 7 to 10 years, this project will consolidate various county programs by leveraging hoteling where it makes sense. Next slide. This slide covers 2 near-term projects and a medium-term project. The Boston Garage project will address the building facade and stormwater flooding issues within the next several years, and then we'll address more routine maintenance after that. We also recently completed the demolition of the old Virginia Hospital Center building at 601 South Carolyn Springs, and have included funding in the CIP for the anticipated phase redevelopment of the site, which includes shared parking and access to the Long Branch Nature Center. The Trade Center Optimization Plan and the Trade Center NOC relocation project is another medium-term project, which includes funding for the eventual relocation of the Network Operations Center at the Trade Center. Options being explored include cloud migration and alternative locations. Next slide. That brings us to our long-term projects. The long-term projects include funding for the eventual construction of the Fire Station 7 at the west end of Columbia Pike. Approximately $4 million is included in FY25 to purchase the property at 5519 Columbia Pike for the eventual construction. The CIP also includes funding for a library at 3108 Columbia Pike site, which may include mixed-use development. The site demolition is currently under progress, and the parking lot will be used by APS in the near term. The last project on this slide is one that we already briefed at the operating budget. You saw that we had included funding for a study which will look at a range of options, including what public use can be accommodated within the existing building footprint, as well as maximizing the building footprint within the site. And then finally, we've included placeholder funding in the out years of the CIP for the eventual construction based on the planning study. Next slide. So these are just some of the other projects that I'll highlight fairly quickly here. Fire logistics project will consolidate fire logistics from the old Fire Station 5 building for a better coordinated response during emergencies. The Oakland Street warehouse project will renovate the warehouse to support police operations and also facilitate the expansion of the Signature Theater space. And the Crystal City Library includes developer contributions for a potential library. The library site and the programming have not yet been identified. The facilities condition assessment line item includes funding for continuously updating our facilities condition assessment and also various planning studies. Some of the key planning studies are highlighted on the table. The facilities finishes, furnishing, and equipment line item covers funding for minor capital renovations at county facilities such as painting and chair replacements. And that brings us to our next slide, which is an overall summary of the 10-year CIP. With a total overall investment of $267 million, the program shows steady investment in county facilities with some peaks for major projects such as Columbia Pike Library and Fire Station 7. And before I turn it over to George, I'll pause for any questions.
Thank you. I think we only have 2 slides to go. So if there are no burning questions, we'll just keep going and take the questions.
Okay, next slide, please. Slide 31 is a roll-up of all of our requests divided between new funding, which is $367 million, and reliance on previously approved funding to round us out to the $398 million. Next. Okay, our CIP request is a balanced approach within our funding constraints. We believe it advances our solar capture, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and electrification of our heating systems, continues our state of good repair, consolidates our emergency response facilities, as Adil described, and commits to future growth in public facilities with a planned library and fire station additions. And that does conclude our presentation.
Thank you so much. And I'll go with questions. And actually, I think Susan had one yelled, so I'm going to just work the opposite. We'll just work down the opposite direction we've been going. Start with Susan.
Okay, and I'll start from the end and work back, but I'll just ask one now. So question on buses. So APS Trade Center optimization, we have funded some additional study in the next year or two. The APS, I believe, presented their study as costing $350 million and then invested no additional dollars in their 10-year CIP. Can you say a little bit about what it will take to get to realistic movement forward?
Well, I think it really is up to APS, and you're right. It's a tremendous expenditure of funds, and the money they provided would rebuild the facility and provide the charging equipment, did not include the purchase of the buses. So there will be a second phase of the current initial study that we will support with some modest amount of co-funding over the next 2 years. It will round out the total budget. And as a precursor or planning ahead, our other request is we'll move the Trade Center NOC either to the cloud or someplace within the Trade Center that would not be in the footprint of schools' expanded facility. But that's as much as the county is willing to commit at the moment.
Okay, and is it true that the APS has no additional dollars for that study going forward, as far as we know?
Well, I can't speak for APS, okay. So I don't know.
Got it. Okay. And then second bus question, then I'll yield to my colleagues. Ballston Garage, is there any chance the first floor could ever accommodate buses height-wise? We can come back on that. Seems unlikely, but asking.
We'll have to get back to you on that. Having been in that garage far too many times, the question about turning radius and height.
It wouldn't be on the second floor, for sure.
No, I know. We'll get back to you. That's an intriguing question.
It is indeed. Thank you. Matt.
On the detention facility comprehensive study, I'm guessing in the process of reaching this, you talk with all the stakeholders, the sheriff as well. Is that how we develop? I actually don't know the question as to how we develop our CIP with respect to that facility, or we might.
So you're referring to the comprehensive study or the security system upgrade?
Comprehensive study.
Okay, so pass on to a deal for that one, actually.
So that actually is a planning study that we're going to be undertaking. Or was the question more related to the courts police building?
It's the detention facility more. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's that funding is for a planning study, and then once the study is completed, that will inform what sort of infrastructure upgrades are needed. So as a part of that process, we will coordinate with the stakeholders there. And the funding that you see for construction out there in the out years is just placeholder funding at this point.
Got it. Okay, great. On the courthouse complex, I like the additional floors. I've heard specific concerns regarding our sewer, our infrastructure for our sewer system from Path Forward? And is that something that we've considered? Or could you consider just in the course of that investment?
The storm sewer system or the sanitary sewer?
Sanitary sewers, I should say.
Okay. I'm not sure exactly the reference, but we are going to be upgrading the water pipes of that building as well. So is this internal to the building that you've heard concerns about?
I'm not sure if it's internal or external, but at least it sounds like you will consider it.
Yes,
so.
internally we are addressing the piping needs within the building.
And want to yield to colleagues. I will want to follow up a little bit on the Pike Library to understand the timing. We've got a couple of years for sure that we're going to be using that as a parking
Right.
lot.
So we talked a little bit about this. I'm trying to think if it was perhaps when we were schools, but I think that's planned for analysis and then construction in 31, if I'm not, fiscal year 31. So if you heard the presentation schools made about the Legacy Career Center, they were saying, well, you can stay as long as you want, you know, and I was pretty clear with the superintendent and staff there that, no, we are going to be moving to the Pike in fiscal year 31. The reason why we picked that year has to do with more of our capacity, bonding capacity. If for some reason we were able to do it earlier, we would like to do it earlier. But we made a commitment to the community to move to the Pike. That's just the earliest we can afford it. So schools have said we could stay as long as we want, and we appreciate the invitation, but I don't want to stay any longer than we have to, so we can move to the Pike.
That's very helpful, thank you. I think that covers everything. One last question and then I'll be done, which is, can you provide a little context on our tool for evaluating HVAC systems? Mr. Carantonis asked about electrical. There is, I think, a spreadsheet that, or you do a cost analysis over a course, the full life of each. There's heat pumps, which are much more expensive in the short term, but they may recover over the long term. Do I have an understanding of the process? Like it appears at Central Library, we decided against changing systems towards an electrical or heat pump. And is that based on somewhere out there, there is a spreadsheet that sort of tried to look at the overall costs over the course of the length of this? Can you give me a little context on the tool that you may have used?
Yeah, I can certainly dive into the to the decarb tool, and that's our main tool that we use at sort of the highest level planning to look at the different equipment upgrade types. And so whether it is electric resistance or a VRF or even, you know, a high efficiency gas, so we can have that delta. And so just looking between the difference of those on sort of the cost, you know, upfront costs, operating costs. And so looking at, you know, first cost, operating costs, and to try to help inform that in addition to the GHG savings and impacts.
But you do look at it over 10 years or 20 years, the life of this, the operating cost savings in that calculation?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, tax.
Thank you. Two shorter ones. Number one, on the CARB tool, one thing that I try to understand is, well, on one side, the CARB tool gives us an idea of the greenhouse emission impact and the improvements, and also, you know, balancing it with economic, you know, the capital investment that needs to be done. Does it play any role if, for example, in a facility, if we add a solar installation, that this facility becomes then, you know, comes closer to net zero, et cetera? Does this, you know, influence the way we prioritize things? So, for example, if Laboran was to be net zero, if we put the appropriate number of solar on the roof, would this immediately move it forward because it becomes a net zero facility?
So the decarb tool just looks at efficiency measures right now and the different options of efficiency, but we do sort of the separate analysis with, you know, what is the solar capacity to look at that. And I think that'll, you know, potentially play into the solar screening process that we talked about. And if there is ability to pair efficiency with renewables to help, you know, potentially get a, you know, capture both of those gains from efficiency and then the renewables, we could certainly do that. But right now the decarb tool sort of is the efficiency and the different scenarios within that, and then then also looking
So
at.
it doesn't inform at this point further our prioritization of projects?
At this point, it doesn't, but I think that it could be a good.
Okay. The second thing is, has to do with the way we see our own facilities, and I guess we're still learning of what happened in the pandemic and how we occupy, how much space and how big the facilities are. Because I'm seeing here the courthouse complex renovations. So this is hypothermia overflow, which I understand. What else will this do? So what else will we do in that space? Because hypothermia is a temporarily limited use. Is that going to serve other uses as well?
Yeah, DHS has several other uses that they've contacted us about that we're going through and determining their program of requirements, but we think that
So
building.
this is a TBD.
Yes.
So it's for more.
But we think it's a good fit for that type of uses. So yeah. And then long-term, we do have a plan to vacate Court Square West. So the people that are located in Court Square West, we're looking at where can we move them. So investment in 2020 is a big part of that.
Yeah, and the other one was about the just on slide number 25, the DIPSUM consolidation, EOC, and et cetera. Is that this? I understand that this is functionally a priority. I get that, but are there other candidates for this kind of consolidation of office space and on operations?
I'm gonna answer that. Ryan, who's sitting there in the audience, wave, Ryan, he has a full-time job of trying to go through and figure out, he comes from the Department of Homeland Security, and he's worked there with trying to consolidate. I make a point of walking the Bosman building a different floor every day to see how fully occupied we are. We've sent you some statistics that show we're about 40% occupied on our busiest days. So he's pulling together a plan, and that's what this money is for, is to try to consolidate, maybe even break the paradigm. I know department heads aren't listening, so they won't worry about this, about having all our departments together in one place, having hoteling, and sort of reducing the floors that we use. And that's what this money is for. We have to start, the place we're starting is on the 6th floor by bringing public safety, communications, and emergency management here, following through on the last recommendation of the 9/11 Commission to get things co-located. There was a little tagline at the bottom that said the Department of Technology Services is losing their home. So they have to go somewhere. And we've picked them as the first candidate, given that they're the technology department, to figure out how we can have them located here either with much more of a virtual presence or also a smaller footprint. So that whole process is going to start with this first move.
Yeah, because this ties back to also all the significant investment that we're making in new furniture and all this, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay,
Thank you.
Maureen.
Okay, back to energy resilience. The energy resilience planning and development item that's on here, you said it's one of the few things that we have included federal grant funding for. Is that a grant we've already received or that we're applying for and hoping to get?
We've applied, cleared one hurdle, and then waiting to hear final if that recommendation comes with that. Yeah, that's one of many grants that we've been applying for and researching and tracking.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I know that the team has been really hard at work trying to compete as hard as we can for these. Is the planning that we've included here, if we end up not getting the grant, is that kind of like a no-go then? If we don't have the federal funds to match what we've got, are we still able to do it? Do we have to cut it back? Kind of what happens?
I think we certainly do want to do it, but I think at a different scale. That's what we would do.
Okay. Great. And then I think my other question is on facilities conditions. Are there any facilities that we haven't included here that perhaps like their assessment was on the cusp, or one really bad natural disaster could put them in a really bad position? Kind of what's on the horizon that's not in this but might be good for us to have in mind?
So our facility condition process is constantly, it's dynamic. It's every year we look at it. So the short answer is possibly, but I don't have the exact
Not
facility,
specific.
which one
Okay.
would be
Yeah.
the next one I'd have to put on the list. But that is, it is, every facility has a score, and every subsystem within the facility has its own individual score. So
Yeah.
we're able to bring that up to a single overall index, but again, I don't have that
Yeah.
information right now.
Yeah. Mark, is it a ridiculous question to ask to see if we can have the assessment in order? You know, just to know.
Kind of like a worry list?
Yeah. My favorite thing.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Adam?
I think I can put something together,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Susan?
Could you say, we were talking about the energy resilience and the different fuel sources. Have we considered geothermal for any of these buildings, and what's the consideration there?
There, you got it. So I'll kind of just jump on that. So the short answer is we do look at it as an option, but we also have to look at the overall footprint because geothermal is incredibly footprint heavy. It works best for brand new construction such as La Baronne where it exists, as well as the 1212 South Irving community residence. As a retrofit, it is a less viable option because again, we'd have to purchase a significant amount of land or completely rebuild the facility.
Got it, great. And then public EV chargers, can we go back to that again? We had some lively conversation during the operating budget. Can you share where you've landed here and why it makes sense to be investing in public EV chargers in the near term?
So I think overall, our goal is to lead by example, to have our best foot forward and provide the best service we can to the community within our own footprint. That's why all the locations are within current public facilities and community centers. That way we're seeing traffic, or our intention is to see the traffic and usage from individual patrons.
And in terms of demand, we had this conversation. I'm just understanding how it evolved from where we were last time, because the map looks pretty similar to the first proposal.
So right now, those sites are based on current, ability to, most feasible in terms of available power, as well as, what I call ease of installation. What can we get accomplished? And for each site, it's also based from each program how often they are used. So for instance, Central Library, we anticipate a lot of use from that location once it's online. Other locations that are currently online we're seeing about 30% utilization, but we are constantly tracking that information, and we'll have better information once more systems are available.
Stephen, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll just add a few things. I think that a couple other dynamics to that. I think one is, continuing to look at analysis and where charging can be. And I think looking at replicating analysis that were done in this carbon neutral transportation master plan for different areas is one objective. And then also looking at what federal grants may be available for EV charging going forward too. So those are both additional sort of planning activities that we're working on.
Okay, more to come.
Okay, all right, more
Madam Chair.
discussion later. Yes, Takis.
Just a request, because how we understand demand for this is a function of how much private, availability there is, not only how many vehicles we have, and every community has somewhere a sweet spot where you actually, have access to charging. My request is, we have been now for a year and a half having these, public chargers in several places. Some that are really well visited, like for example the Aquatic Center down. And I would appreciate a interim report about how this is used. What does it mean? 30%? Is it 30% of the time? It's 30%. I mean, what kind? I mean, there are details on that. I think they are very well used where they are available, where people visit and drive there, which is not always something we desire, but nevertheless, it's a facility that's well used, and I believe it's ripe for. In my opinion, it's ripe for reporting on how this really works. Thank you.
Excellent. One quick question on energy resiliency. We're increasing the solar capacity on the library, which is great. Does that connect to batteries, or is it all net metering?
It would be net metering, to answer the short question. Yeah.
Net metering, okay. And how is it, if it takes long to answer this question, we'll do it later. How hard is it to put in some batteries and have those actually connect to some batteries, some power that's connected to some maybe crucial systems in a building like the library? How hard is that to do, retrofitting?
the middle, I guess I'll call it. It depends on the facility and the existing electrical system layout. So some
Okay.
could be easier than others. It definitely varies.
It depends. Okay, thank you. We still have one more. Ms. Snyder has been very patient waiting here. I think we're set with questions. Thank you all very, very much. It's pretty cool. I think when I started in 2012, I don't think we talked about energy resiliency or EV chargers at all in the CIP. I don't think we did. So it's cool to be where we are. Thank you so much. Yeah, take care. Appreciate it. And a lot more questions and discussion to come, I know. All right.
A program with a solar battery lending.
Solar battery lending program?
Yeah, lending program.
Lending program, yeah, well, that's actually a really good idea. Yeah. Ms. Snyder, come on up to the table. Right next to the manager, pick your side. Looks good? Sure. How are you? All right, welcome. You're asking the manager? You maybe have to aim it at something?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, yeah. All right, everybody. Order in the court.
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for your patience and for taking, I guess, what's going to probably be overtime for this work session. I believe this is the first time that JFAC has been invited to give feedback on a CIP, and we very much appreciate the gracious invitation and this opportunity. JFAC's mission is to provide input on both this board and to the school board on collaborative long-range facility planning with a special emphasis on, let's see if I can get this.
Yeah, can you advance it?
I'm trying. Mason, I'm going to probably just have to rely on you to advance. Could we go to the next slide, please?
Yep.
With a special emphasis on considering alignment between the two CIPs. This feedback I'm offering today reflects the joint recommendations described in detail in the June 2nd JFAC recommendation letter that we sent to both you and the school board. We offered a similar presentation and feedback to the school board at a work session and we were joined by the FAC on June the 4th. JFAC spent a lot of time this year discussing the APS CIP. We submitted recommendations and feedback on both the APS pre-CIP report and the APS CIP direction. In February, JFAC received a presentation from both APS and county staff on demographic trends, which informs a lot of our perspective. I will spend some time sharing this information today because I feel it provides an important context for CIP planning. We had about 24 hours to discuss the county-managed proposed CIP, but we were prepared with a set of questions and principles that we use to guide all of our CIP discussions. We will likely meet in June to discuss facilities planning with the CIP, with the county CIP in greater detail. A successful CIP process makes careful consideration of how identified needs are prioritized under the parameters of budget constraints and acknowledges the impacts of debt service to operating budgets and overall operational efficiencies. A successful CIP also demonstrates an acknowledgement of the alignment of long-range capital planning, land use planning, and other stated goals such as sustainability between APS and the county. It should consider each project or proposal collectively and in the context of other APS and Arlington County government needs, appropriate timing, available funding, enrollment projections, and demographic forecasts, and planning for long-range site use and facility use in a county where land is a scarce resource. Next slide, please, Mason. Every CIP is a new opportunity to look at the broader context and consider new information. The CIP process allows APS in the county to consider the needs of all Arlington residents and all APS students and ensure that plans address the needs of the entire community, balancing priorities, considering limited sites, and making the best use or reuse of our existing facilities. APS and county facility assets need to be maintained in order to best respond to these changes while being mindful of impacts to debt service on operating budgets. We are experiencing continued inflation, high interest rates, rising construction costs, structural operating budget deficiencies, and climate changes. We included this quote on the presentation from the county manager's message because we feel like it's important. And it captures in a few sentences the primary purpose of joint CIP planning. I won't read it all, but it's all really worth reading. But I will just point out and quote the last couple of sentences that say these assets must be nourished, refurbished, and kept strong. The desire for new facilities and better and more efficient use of these assets is real, intense, and welcome. However, we cannot and should not lose sight of investing smartly to ensure that what we have is secure and what we want is affordable. I also include this message, this sentence, because it came to mind, and I actually shared it with the JFAC earlier this week. It came to mind with the news of the water main break on Walter Reed Drive that resulted in that impacted hundreds of homes and businesses and forced schools to close and community centers to close while it was repaired.
But I will say it was repaired really quickly, and most people affected got water really quickly, because I was one of those, and I was impressed at how fast they did it, which is part of what all this is about, too.
Could we go to the next slide, please? JFAC offers our recommendations in 4 categories, which you may notice are largely aligned with the guiding principles of the county manager's proposed CIP. We recommend that you take a measured fiscal approach that is mindful of impacts of debt service on the operating budget, maintains financial flexibility, and is responsive to new developments, realities, and/or changes. We support the county manager's approach to focus on the metric of the debt service increase rather than relying only on the metric of the 10% debt service limit. JFAC took note of what you wrote in your adopted FY25 budget guidance about the schools, where you noted that there were expressed concerns about fiscal sustainability for our schools moving forward, having relied on one-time funds and reserves to balance their budget for the last few years. JFAC supports the flexibility offered with a measured approach, ensuring that our existing facilities are in the best possible condition and that all solutions are affordable and need-driven. JFAC commends the county manager's CIP for acknowledging impacts to the operating budget that coincide with new capital projects and facilities operations. We recommended that APS take a similar approach. The net surplus of APS seats, which I will go on to further explain, implies that a number of schools will be under-enrolled, which risks inefficiencies and costs that put pressure on operating budgets that are already projected to experience deficits. Under-enrollment can affect all APS students, teachers, and staff, and must be considered through a county-wide lens. We also recommend that you include considerations for environmental resiliency, climate change impacts, and goals for carbon neutrality in capital and facilities planning. JFAC supports and commends the alignment between the boards on goals for carbon neutrality, environmental sustainability, and recommends consideration for the goals in facilities planning and execution. To the maximum extent possible, facility renovations and upgrades should aim to phase out fossil fuels, provide roofs ready for solar installation, and ensure that all existing facilities are operating in an energy-efficient manner. We recommend that you plan for upfront costs that could realize later savings in utility costs. And JFAC supports the plan for the Trade Center optimization study and the plan to electrify APS school bus fleet. We also support the installation of more EV chargers at public facilities. I will now go into more detail on the recommendation of remaining existing assets, that remaining existing assets should be a priority, and then elaborate a bit on the I will later go into more detail on the recommendations of maintaining existing assets and broader joint context planning. But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of demographic background that JFAC received. And I feel like this is important because JFAC received it from both county and APS staff, and I think we're the only body that receives both. And I think, as for joint planning, it's really important to sort of understand what's happening in the county and what's happening in the schools and how they intersect. Okay, next slide, please. Each CIP requires responding to new revenue projections, newly identified needs, and demographic changes. Demographic forecasts have shifted significantly in the past few years. Arlington's overall population forecasts continued steady growth. This slide shows a projected growth of around 65,000 new Arlington residents between now and 2050. Next slide, please. However, recent demographic data shows that the growth is not distributed evenly among age cohorts in the population, with notable declines in the 0 to 9 and 30 to 39 age cohorts, and the only notable growth in the 70 to 79 and 80 plus cohorts. Next slide, please.
It's a great cohort.
Next slide, please. Oh, no, wait, stay there. Thank you. Components of population change are births, deaths, and migration. Housing stock, type of housing, and household size also play a factor. Birth rates in Arlington have dropped 25% since 2016. This is notable, and it's not just an Arlington issue. Birth rates have fallen regionally, in Virginia, in the US, and worldwide. Next slide, please. 2022 migration data, which is the most updated we have at the moment. I checked with staff to see if 2023 was available, but it is not yet. Shows a notable net out-migration on the age 0 to 19 cohorts and a net loss in the 35 to 39 age cohort. The only notable in-migration gain was in the 20 to 24 age cohort and a slight gain in the 55 to 59 age cohort. Next slide, please. Data shows that the average household size has shown continued decline from a peak in 1950 of 3.35 to 2.05 in 2022. Next slide, please. All of this demographic data is used to inform the APS student enrollment data, and JFAC commends this joint work between the county and APS. The latest data suggests that enrollment may be beginning to level off, but remains below the 2019 levels. For capital planning purposes, it is important to understand these projections relative to design capacity and capacity utilization charts and maps. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot from the APS pre-CIP report, and it's an explanation of why understanding capacity utilization matters in capital planning. And it states that this data helps APS to assess capacity need and the type of solution, capital or non-capital, to deploy to accommodate students. Next slide, please. So these next three charts will show capacity utilization, the projected difference between capacity utilization and design capacity seats over the next decade. And this is now, there is now, and something I would have never believed 6 or 8 years ago when I first got involved in facilities issues, that there is a projected surplus of seats at every school level for the next 10 years. In school year 2028-29, APS will have a pre-K through 12 total surplus of 2,492 seats. That's just in 5 years. Even with an assumed modest growth in the out years, APS is still projected to have a total pre-K surplus of 1,823 seats. This slide is showing the surplus of seats at the elementary school level, so it's pre-K through 5. And if you note that I'm pointing out school year 2028-29, which is kind of the middle line, because that's the last date that we have, that we're using actual births. To project, everything else beyond that is based on assumptions and needs to be taken with caution. But in school year 2028, there is projected to be a surplus of 1,316 elementary school seats. And this is a surplus increase from last year's projections. Next slide, please. This is the middle school level. There is a projected surplus of around 200 to 300 seats in the middle school level in the next 10 years. It's not as notable as the elementary school surplus, but it's still a surplus. Next slide, please. This is the high school surplus. Within the next 5 years, the surplus of seats at the high school level is projected to grow to around 1,200 surplus seats, and then maintain a surplus of around 700 seats. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide, please. Okay, thank you. This is a slide that shows the kindergarten replacement ratio. So it's the kindergarten cohort and replacing the 12th grade class. And it's helpful to consider the surplus projected in this year's APS student enrollment projections and capacity utilization charts in the context of the county demographic data and how current trends could impact future projections. This September, APS had a negative kindergarten to 12th grade ratio for the first time in at least the 17 years on this chart. School year 2023 K cohort reflects births that occurred in 2018, which is one of the first years of the notable birth rate decline. This negative number that you see on the very far right, the little orange bar, suggests the potential for further decline with smaller incoming cohorts replacing graduating cohorts that then move through the system. This chart also illustrates a driver of the growth from 2009 to 2018, where kindergarten replacement averaged 650 more kindergarten than 12th grade students. Next slide, please. This graph reflects the slide I showed previously showing the 25% decline in birth rates since 2016. I'm showing it here to try to illustrate that we are just beginning to see the impacts of that birth rate decline on kindergarten cohorts. The negative replacement ratio in the fall 2023 reflects births from 2018, which was 2,943 births. Note that the actual birth data each year after 2018 reflects 300 to 500 fewer births each year, and those students have yet to enter the APS system. If we can remember when student enrollment started growing back in the 2009, 2010, it started at the elementary school level and then moved to middle school and then to high school. And the same consideration should be given to decline and plan for it. The same consideration for planning should be given to decline. Next slide, please. Recent birth to kindergarten capture rates reflect more outmigration than in earlier 2000s, dropping from a peak of 0.784 of 2007 births to 0.627 from 2018 births, which are already at a notable decline. So that's a lower capture rate of a lower actual number and a lower number that we know is going to continue to decline. Next slide, please. So it is important to consider that, like with enrollment growth, the surplus of seats is never evenly distributed around the county. Also, like enrollment growth, seats and sites aren't always where they're needed. It's important to look at the inventory with a broad lens and ensure that decisions make the best use and reuse of existing facilities and are mindful of future needs and long-term growth of the entire population. This information also suggests that new seats are not needed and that non-capital or not operational solutions should be utilized. So if you can see, so this is a map. The original map is from the pre-CIP report showing last year's projections. So the numbers in blue, the Zone 1 showing a surplus of 709 seats, Zone 2 a surplus of 59, Zone 3 a surplus of 536, and Zone 4 actually a deficit of 278. And then the new numbers in orange reflect this year's projections in school year 28-29. So the surplus grew in Zone 1 from 709 to 837. The surplus in Zone 2 grew from 59 to 271. The surplus in Zone 3 grew, well, it stayed about the same with 526. And the deficit in Zone 4, which just has 2 schools in it, Oak Ridge and Hoffman Boston, that deficit grew slightly too. So next slide, please. This map shows forecasted housing growth from now until 2050. We must plan for the forecast that we're given, and demographic data strongly suggests that this surplus of seats will continue to increase. It's also important to acknowledge in planning where the growth is forecast and be mindful of how capital solutions commit sites to specific public uses for a generation, requiring every other planning process, such as a neighborhood school boundary changes or needs such as fire stations, community centers, parks, libraries, future schools, and fields, must be planned around that choice once committed, can't easily be reversed. This new environment and forecast of surplus seats and under-enrolled schools underscores the need to plan differently than we did during a period of student enrollment growth. It requires us to think differently and to identify new tools to manage enrollment and new ways of planning to ensure that we're making the best use and reuse of our existing facilities and sites. Next slide, please. Demographic forecasts and student enrollment projections suggest that now is the time to prioritize and develop a clear plan to demonstrate affordability and timing for maintaining and upgrading existing county and APS assets. For APS, the surplus of seats offers an opportunity to finally invest in updating existing schools that have needed attention but had to wait during the era when APS was facing rapid enrollment growth and had to spend available funds and time bringing new seats online to accommodate that growth. The executive summary, of which there's a screenshot here, of the long-range report and facilities condition assessment report, or FCA report, even states as such. I won't read it all, but it does say, recent new construction projects have provided additional student capacity to catch up to growing population demands. So there is a reduced need for new construction to increase seats and an increased need to address deferred renovation, maintenance, and modernization needs on existing buildings.
And I'm going to just emphasize again, this is a report to the school board from their own study, a study that was done for them, correct?
Yeah, it's the executive summary from an APS report.
From last year, I think it was.
From last fall.
Yes, thank you.
JFAC commends the county manager's proposed CIP for having maintaining existing facilities as a guiding principle and for having a clear plan that demonstrates balancing, maintaining existing assets and timing for new facilities. However, it is not clear to JFAC in the APS CIP that there is a clearly demonstrated plan to address critical facility needs or that maintaining and upgrading existing facilities is prioritized. Funding is shown to be available in funding scenarios, but without specific timing or costs or an understanding of prioritization of projects, it is difficult to weigh the options or understand affordability. The APS FCA report identified many needs for the APS facility and quantified those needs in raw costs and identified approximate years the needs would need to be accomplished. Meeting all of those needs in the coming years will likely require hundreds of millions of dollars to execute. Those needs must be prioritized, recognizing that some are more urgent than others, and also the critical importance of assets must be nourished, refurbished, and kept strong. Next slide, please. As part of an effort to prioritize capital spending on addressing existing facility needs, JFAC recommended exploring non-capital options for relocating the Montessori Public School of Arlington and for the reuse of the Legacy Career Center building. JFAC feels that not spending $45 to $50 million will allow for that amount of bond to be available for existing facility needs. Identifying a non-capital reuse of the Legacy Career Center building would maintain the ability to respond to forthcoming information, including but not limiting to long-term plans for the space once the Columbia Pike Library vacates that site. This is a very important site in an important part of the county that is expecting significant growth. A non-capital option would also expedite the relocation of Montessori Public School from the site, relocating them out of a building with noted poor air quality 2 to 3 years sooner than under the current capital option being considered by APS. A non-capital option could also provide for an earlier demolition of the existing Montessori building, which could finish the entire site with green space for community use 2 to 3 years earlier in 2026 or 2027. This is years sooner than under existing options, and students on that site and neighbors would not have to live with additional years with the site under construction and would offer savings and cost escalation. The FCA report data shows that the Legacy Career Center building does not need renovation, and $22 million in bonds have been spent upgrading that facility since 2012. There are existing spaces within the Legacy Career Center building that could be used to meet public needs without a major renovation. One small example is the early childhood education spaces that are part of the Career Center, the CTE classes. My daughter takes that class, so this has been confirmed. That could be used to potentially offer subsidized childcare, which would be very much utilized and appreciated in this part of the county. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, no, go back to the other slide. I'm sorry. So this is a map of Thomas Jefferson Middle School site and park. JFAC recognizes a significant urgent need for a major renovation or rebuild of Thomas Jefferson Middle School, whose dual-use site and facility would make it a joint project between APS and the county. We recommend that planning to identify potential funding and timing for the renovation or rebuild of TJ Middle School be a priority in this CIP. JFAC notes that Thomas Jefferson Middle School was ranked as the first school on the list that APS staff created with space inadequacies, and it was ranked as the first school that needed a major renovation by APS staff. We recognize notable educational space inadequacies, such as 43 out of 65 classrooms do not have operable windows or natural light. We also note that there is just 6 years of remaining use of life on the roof. JFAC recognizes that given the constraints of the TJ Middle School site and investments in the fields that are on that site, that on-site phasing for a renovation would not likely be possible. If swing space will be required, that should be considered and planned for. Next slide, please. So JFAC was created following a recommendation of the 2015 Community Facilities Study Group, of the Community Facility Study. The Community Facility Studies Group was created to identify challenges of strategic facilities planning for changing demographics in Arlington, where there is a scarcity of land for public uses. Their work recognized the importance of collaborative planning, prioritizing and balancing needs of APS and Arlington and county needs, and making the most efficient use of our existing facilities. The principles that they developed through that work guide all JFAC discussions. JFAC fundamentally believes that CIP decisions need to be made with a full and transparent consideration and in the context of all county and APS needs. This includes a need to acknowledge that timing and funding for forthcoming information needs to be identified and weighed against all options. There's a lot of information that is unknown but forthcoming right now. The APS feasibility studies for major renovations, rebuilds are still forthcoming. Whether or not swing space will be needed for any major renovation project still needs to be determined. Funding and timing for the execution of the Trade Center optimization study have not been identified or accounted for. This suggests that the right approach would be exercising caution before committing to any large capital project in this year's bond. JFAC recognizes the importance of all projects being examined collectively and the inextricable connection between planning for one site or facility and all other sites and facilities and future needs. Planning should ensure that the aggregate whole is optimized and that key gaps don't exist. This principle is exemplified in this CIP cycle within the connection between the Trade Center site, with the connection the Trade Center site has to other sites and planning such as the Quincy site, the Virginia Hospital Center site, and further exemplified with the Career Center site and forthcoming plans for the Columbia Pike Library, and the need to make the best use and reuse of APS facilities in this new environment of a surplus of seats. We cannot overstate the importance of making broad context decisions when spending hundreds of millions of dollars, and the need to give careful consideration for long-term site use in a county where land is our scarcest resource.
Thank you. Excellent. I have to be somewhere at 6:30 that is a half an hour away, so I need to leave. But I am going to leave you in the capable hands of folks here. I don't know how much discussion. Obviously, I think a lot of this focuses on the schools, and we are not doing the schools CIP. But I really, really appreciate this because demographics and what's happening is something you don't really see until you actually put it in front of us this way and you can see what's really happening. It's absolutely crucial to know that. I'm sure we're going to be having lots of discussion. I'm going to leave the gavel in the capable hands of my vice chair. And colleagues, I welcome any discussion and questions, and please fill me in when I talk to you later. And thank you so much, Ms. Snyder. Really excellent work. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for the invitation to be here and the opportunity.
Thank you for coming. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. From left to right, Ms. Coffey first.
Yeah, thank you. I think, I love these demographic studies. It's so interesting and cool. And, there's like a couple of thoughts that I had as you were talking. And one is really the shrinking of our younger adult population is really, it's not inherent, right? It's not, the aging of our population is an inherent truth based on national demographics and where baby boomers are in their lives, and that's just gonna happen. But the loss of people in their 20s and 30s is a policy choice, and it comes from the lack of housing, the lack of opportunity within the community to settle and to feel like this is really your home. And so I think that's really important, but also it's important to show that even with it shrinking at the fastest rate of any age demographic, those bars are still by far the largest bars in that chart. Half of the median age of our population is 35. And so young people are very much a large and critical part of our community, and making sure that we include them and we serve them is really important. And then another point is the projected housing units. I just want to clarify, and this might be a manager question or a follow-up question, but the 38,000 that you have here on this slide, that is not what is in the pipeline. That is if we continue to do things at the rate that we're going.
I'm just assuming, and Stacy can speak to it better than I can. I think this is sourced from one of our planning documents that show what the estimate of housing is. So, yeah.
But it's not like if we approved everything in our pipeline currently and stopped, we would not get to 38,000, right? We still need to be continuing.
Right. This is estimates between now and 2050 of what we anticipate based on all of our plans.
Yeah.
And all of our land use policies of what could be done. It's not what's in the pipeline.
Got it. Thank you. And then I think the other thing that I would just highlight or point out based on that is really the need for community facilities that are along our metro corridor. I know we've talked a decent amount about Quincy Park and Central Library, but if you think about the Clarendon Courthouse neighborhood or Clarendon really through Roslyn, there's not a lot of community spaces that are available in terms of actual free use, gyms or rec centers or meeting spaces. There's this building as a public facility, but not exactly like a hangout meeting community type of space. And there's schools. And I think, I really have heard a desire. I think there's a lot of people that I know in my community who don't even know that we have some of these rec centers because they're not located in places that people naturally are going to go. And so I just want to kind of surface that as we think about our joint and public facilities is where we're adding population and where we have existing community facilities is not really the same. And so how do we kind of bridge that in the long term and make sure that the facilities are where our people are?
Yeah, that was more
Yeah,
of a
I mean, I
statement.
completely agree, and that's why planning for that is so critical. Yes.
Okay, Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you. Slide 13, we've had spirited discussions on the phone, and I think it's been very helpful. But slide 13 is 2020 to 22, and there is no data on 23, 24. Not yet. And so I'll be interested to see what that data says. I have shared my view of the demographer who spoke at 2050 is that he was wrong. He believes that our population is, people are going to move rural, and I do not believe that. That's what he said at that 2050 session. That's debatable. He certainly was looking at, I thought he was right based on through the pandemic. There's no doubt about that. But the place, if Texas is 80% urban at this point, people like to go to good places. So I think it's a debatable question, but I'm still thrilled that you brought this and really appreciate you acknowledging this is data we need to consider through 2022 and 2023 and 2024 we have to find out. So that's one thought. A second is we still have lost between 500 and 1,000 students that left APS during the pandemic, right? I think that's the case, they're not going to be replaced because they're not returning at a quick pace. Is that JFAC or your analysis?
I don't know the exact number of how many left during the pandemic. I know that APS lost population during the pandemic, but but I also the last couple years of enrollment trends post-pandemic have been pretty consistent.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we're still experiencing kind of enrollment, COVID level impacts, but that's just my personal.
No, when I asked questions at the work session, the responses were very much, about some of the capacity to your other slides that are on the elementary, secondary, and middle side. There was sort of 90% is fine. Now, I think that some schools in the north, you said 837 down. I think what we have at this moment, I feel, is a debate that, with respect to, we are on the county board. So the school board, we have the legal ability we have a binary choice. Our legal ability but we can engage in dialogue that seeks to advance something that is beyond MPSA is a bad idea versus we should go forward. We've been planning forever. And so I'm deeply interested in a conversation that acknowledges the shift. Because if you look just at the numbers, we have more overcapacity today than we will have in 10 years. You add up these numbers, we have, unless there is a change, which is what you assume, we have more overcapacity today than we will have in 10 years. That's the numbers of these three slides. So I'm interested in a dialogue that takes us to a place that seeks to find something that acknowledges the shift without I'm not in a place where I'm going to say that the county board should be making all these decisions, because I think reasonable people can differ on the MPSA decision. So that's the question for me, is like, do you have, as JFAC, keeping in mind deeply held views that this red circle and we are going down in terms of enrollment, keeping in mind those views, do you have any thoughts, or does JFAC have any thoughts as to how we create a dialogue on capacity that is, over the next 6 months to a year, that is different than what I see as a bipolar conversation that we're having, appear to be having right now? And you may not, but love to follow up. I don't want to, you're focused on this data, and that's fair, and thrilled that you're here, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that conversation over the next 6 months.
Well, first, the enrollment, today's enrollment is lower than next year's because of pre-K. And the pre-K number is close to 250 to 300. They haven't been able to fill pre-K for the last couple of years, but they need to, it's a sort of a budgetary decision.
Yeah.
That, that pre-K is not projected, it's a number, it's, it's around 12, it's a little more than 1,200 allocated, but the actual number we've been getting is a low 900 number or less for the last couple of years. And so the number that we're seeing this year reflects actual pre-K enrollment. So it's 200 to 300 lower than what these projections are.
So the red in that one chart is going to keep getting bigger. The one chart that you
The
had.
kindergarten replacement
It's gonna-
cohort. I would be surprised if it doesn't.
Sure.
And I think that, and so, the numbers that, the 20 to 2022 numbers that we're looking at kind of trends. And the APS enrollment projections, they don't forecast. They look at this day's data. They look and they use projections based on, they're kind of looking in the rear view and not forward. JFAC, since we got both of this data, I'm just trying to thread, okay, we see this data here and this data here, and we're seeing this this surplus of seats. And as far as the decision between Montessori and
Sure.
and the Career Center, from a JFAC perspective, we want you to make the decision, and I'm presenting this information from a bigger picture, from the larger context. And we are advocating for planning that prioritizes maintaining existing facilities, makes the best use and reuse of our existing facilities, which we see an uneven distribution of that surplus. Like with growth, it's not every school is over capacity, not every school is under capacity, and you can look at it like, oh, it's just 90%, but some schools are really under capacity, and some, and that does impact instruction.
Sure.
I could get into details about AP, and I did
Sure.
at their work session, but I'm here for the county board, and I think, and I am, JFAC is not asking you to make a decision about what the schools are doing.
Sure.
We are just presenting this information. We're talking about land use. We're talking about demographics. We're supporting the idea of maintaining existing facilities, and that should be prioritized. We're acknowledging that the way that capital planning impacts debt service, and that's a big deal for an APS operating budget that is operating, that you have had many conversations about an operating budget, and how that, and the surplus of seats also impacts operational efficiencies. And so I think, yeah.
It's presenting the data. Now, I guess where I feel like I listen to the school board, and they're saying that the closing of a school is super hard, and there are parts, it would mean a significant bus ride. Some people don't think that's critical. So it seems to me that in furtherance of the goal, that this is data, but I guess I could argue that there's additional data that is not yet part of this slide deck that might not be perhaps part of JFAC's mission, but it does seem that additional data with respect to the processes and where seats are is not irrelevant. And so I guess that's the starting point that I'm not saying that that's necessarily JFAC's role, but that's the conversation that I think could lead to a better discussion of the capital budget between the two boards over the coming months. And I don't know how to do that. We haven't even done the operating budget, which we promised to spend every Tuesday and Thursday of the summer together. But I do think it's important to say out loud that we don't have a system or a way on the capital side. So I've monopolized plenty of time, and I know colleagues have big thoughts on it, but I hope that that's at least reasonable thoughts to share, because I feel like this is great data, and I'm thrilled you're here, but I also feel like there's additional pieces to the story that I'm trying to think through.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrand. Ms. Cunningham.
Yeah, first I just want to say a huge thank you to JFAC, to the leadership, to the whole team. I know this is, even in a normal year, this would be a lot to digest, but we have had a very full year on the staff side with a few systems rollouts, and appreciate your patience and late nights getting this to us. I just want to, kind of go back to that almost 10-year-old community facilities study that came also after a lot of work. The number one recommendation out of that, I think, still holds incredibly well, which is make maximum use and reuse of the facilities we have. And I think that our climate goals and our financial stability goals both align with that as well. So I appreciate you pushing us and pushing the school board as well to think about how can we optimize our space usage today and be ready to meet the needs of tomorrow. I mean, I think the need for an elementary school in Crystal City area at some point in the next decade or so is just jumping off the page unless something really changes in terms of how much family housing we're opening there. And the debt service versus operating cost impact is really important, and our team thinks about that and worries about that day in and day out to keep us all in good place. And so I think for our whole community, that challenge is how do we use the space that we have and leave, as you said, caution and space for expanding in the future when that need arises and where it arises. And I think that's a critical climate concern, and it's a reasonable fiscal concern as well. So thank you for bringing it.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham. I have a couple of questions. So first of all, thank you so much for presenting it. I feel a little bit embarrassed that this is the first time that JFAC is presenting at the CIP work session. Let's make sure that doesn't happen again. So that's number one. Number two, so one of the desires of optimization of use is to multi-use, to add, I mean, and this is why the J stands for joint, right? Like TJ. So how does JFAC digest the current status of multi-use and stacked use of facilities? Are we doing well? Are we doing better? Should we be doing better in general? The reason why I'm asking that is because we are seeing that we will have kind of excess space, excess facility space here and there, et cetera. So we need to have a plan of doing something with that. Ms. Coffey came with an amazing idea, for example, of considering childcare as an additional use. So is JFAC at all looking into that, since we are talking about how to deal with excess surplus of square footage?
I mean, we have discussed the possibility of, or we have discussed planning for, identifying tools to plan for surplus of seats. Okay. And identifying kind of where in the county you want to, for example, when in the pre-CIP report, I'm sure you guys heard about it, it was recommended that Nottingham be used as swing space. The students moved out. And one of the questions that JFAC asked was, okay, well, what happens to this facility if you use it for swing space? Well, first we said you've got to wait for the data. There's information, the FCA report hasn't even been released yet, and you're making this recommendation, so we don't even know whether or not you're going to need elementary school swing spaces. This is the optimal place in the county. So we said, wait, you need more information. It's a recommendation that's out of context, and we're all about larger context planning. And so one of the questions that was asked was, what are you going to do with it when you're finished, if it's no longer needed for swing space? Here's a facility that's empty in the northern part of the county. Is it located in a part of the county where other joint uses could be needed, or is it going to be like Madison Community Center up in the north part of the county that it's another facility that we just can't find a use for? So that's when we talk about reusing our facilities and we talk about sort of planning long term. We're not thinking, there needs to be really, thought put into, okay, well, if I make this move now, what are the next 3 moves after that? And what are the implications, especially in a county where our facilities, as Maureen very correctly pointed out, are not always where the services are needed. And when we have a lot of surplus seats in the northern part of the county, and if you don't move kids around, boundary changes are always hard. Boundary changes are coming for APS. They have to, because it's not, and if you don't use all the tools on the table and program moves, moving programs to repurpose a school has precedent in APS. They did it 3 years ago when they moved Key from where they were in Roslyn. And they largely did that because they'd opened a school in a part of the county and they had more seats than they needed. And if they were going to, if they were just going to do it with boundary changes, it would have meant that the kids from Roslyn would be bused to Glebe, the kids from the Glebe zone would be bused to Cardinal, and then the bus. So when you talk about busing, you got to think about the longer term implications and the broad, and this is what JFAC is recommending. We don't have a specific, and we made a specific recommendation for a non-capital option on APS for a very specific reason. I mean, we had no expectation that the school board was going to adopt that recommendation, but we felt like we needed to further explain what a non-capital option could mean, because otherwise we didn't want to make any suggestion that Montessori would stay in that building, or that site wouldn't get finished, or that Montessori wouldn't have a home, or that they wouldn't, or that they would be disbanded, or we just offered this specific recommendation to actually verify that we felt like Montessori is a valued asset to APS.
So, thank you. I'm not going to belabor it more. We are a little bit, 50 minutes. We're almost at 7 p.m. With any more other questions? So, thank you so much for coming, everybody, staff here, for staying with us until this. We are adjourned until tomorrow. We have a closed session at 1 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And